Good morning and welcome to Friday here on BBC One with election news and reaction now over breakfast.
Hello, very good morning to you. You're watching Breakfast with Dermot Murnaghan and Natasha Kaplinsky.
Tony Blair wins an historic third term as Prime Minister, but Labour's majority is slashed.
That's our main story here on Breakfast. It's Friday, the 6th of May.
Good morning, thanks for joining us. Tony Blair admits he'll have to listen to the message from the voters.
British people wanted the return of a Labour government, but with a reduced majority. And we have to respond to that sensibly and wisely and responsibly.
Gains for Conservatives. Michael Howard admits defeat but insists the result is a turning point.
And gains for the Liberal Democrats as well. Charles Kennedy declares it's the birth of an era of three-party politics.
Also coming up on Breakfast this morning, the Iraq effect as anti-war candidate George Galloway wins in Bethnal Green. We assess the effects of the conflict on the voting.
And it wouldn't be an election, of course, without Peter Snow. All the twists, the turns, the upsets. Peter will be here to tell us how the race was won.
Our main news this morning, Tony Blair has won an historic third successive election, but with a much reduced majority.
Well, with most of the seats declared, the latest prediction is a majority of 66 for Labour. This is the state of the parties a short while ago. Labour on 346 seats, having lost 45. The Conservatives 188, gaining 30. Liberal Democrats are on 56, up 12. Plaid Cymru down 1 to 3, and the Scottish National Party up 2 to 6. And 3 seats went to other parties.
If we translate that into a share of the vote, Labour took 36.6%. That's down 5.9% on last time. The Conservatives were up 0.5% on 32.9%, while the Liberal Democrats took 22.4%, up 3.9%.
Well, the Prime Minister said the British people wanted a return of a Labour government, but with a reduced majority, and he promised to respond to that sensibly, wisely and responsibly. The Conservatives said the public had wanted to cut Tony Blair down to size and make him more accountable, and the Liberal Democrats said they were now the only truly national party and were becoming the real challengers to Labour.
We're going to be hearing from all of the main parties this morning here on Breakfast, but first, our political correspondent Sean Lay now reports on the night that Britain's electoral landscape changed.
Anthony Charles Linton Blair, 24,421.
Tony Blair didn't look like a man who just made history. He's the first Labour leader to win 3 successive terms in Downing Street, but his party has just been re-elected with the smallest share of the vote of any government.
It's not yet clear, obviously, what the majority is. It seems as if it's clear, but also that the British people wanted the return of a Labour government, but with a reduced majority. And we have to respond to that sensibly and wisely and responsibly. We have to make sure that we focus on the things that matter to people, the things that they've talked about to me during the course of this campaign.
One possible explanation, Iraq. Reg Keys, who stood against Mr Blair in protest at the death of his son in the war, delivered a blunt message.
I hope in my heart that one day the Prime Minister may be able to say sorry. That one day he will say sorry to the families of the bereaved.
8 years ago, it was Stephen Twiggs' unexpected victory against Michael Portillo which summed up the Labour landslide. His defeat this time illustrated the bigger-than-expected swing back to the Tories in London.
Hereby declare
Shapps Grant V, the Conservative Party candidate, 22,100.
Other Labour ministers suffered a similar fate. Although Michael Howard has led the Conservatives to their third successive election defeat, he thinks his party's performance vindicates his leadership.
What has happened on this election day marks a significant step towards our recovery. I am proud of the campaign that we have fought. We have taken a stand on the things that really do matter to the people of our country. We have sent a message to Mr Blair.
It began well for the Tories, defeating Labour in Putney, but a good night in London was not matched elsewhere in the country. Edgbaston was the party's most winnable seat in Birmingham, but it was Labour who were left smiling both in the Midlands and in much of the north. Charles Kennedy ended the night well pleased by his party's performance, especially the gains made at Labour's expense.
And I think that the era of three-party politics right across the United Kingdom is now with us. That is something that I welcome. I think it is a healthy development.
But not in the way he'd intended. The Liberal Democrats had wanted to defeat leading Tories, but the decapitation strategy largely failed. David Davis holding his seat and only one member of the Conservatives' top team being ousted. Instead, the party's big gains were against Labour. In seats like Newbury, voters returned to the Tories, perhaps a sign that they now perceive the Liberal Democrats as being to the left of Labour. If so, that will alarm party strategists. Whilst the SNP made gains in Scotland, it was a disappointing night for Plaid Cymru, which lost a seat and failed to win its top target. Wales also saw the Tories win seats for the first time since 1997. For Labour, the sourest moment came towards the end of the night. The anti-war MP George Galloway narrowly won Bethnal Green after a bitter, ill-tempered campaign. His presence in the new Parliament will be a daily reminder to Tony Blair of the electoral price his party seems to have paid over Iraq. Sean Lay, BBC News.
Well, our political correspondent Sean Lay is with us in the studio. Good morning to you, Sean. Quite a night, a third historic term for Labour. But clearly there is a swing away from the government.
There is a swing away from the government. It's not as big as perhaps some in the Labour Party had feared. And certainly the Prime Minister's team is saying this morning, having looked at the results they've had so far, that Labour can govern comfortably with that kind of majority. It doesn't mean they have to back away from new Labour policies. But nonetheless, I think it's a cautionary night for Labour. I think you saw that in Tony Blair's face and in what he had to say, and I think they will have to learn lessons from this result. A third historic victory, but on a much lower share of the vote than perhaps they would have hoped for.
Looking at the other parties, a better night for Michael Howard than was expected.
I think it certainly secures his position for now as Tory party leader. The kinds of gains he's made, they're certainly not dramatic gains, but they're good gains from his point of view. One word of caution, though, when you looked at the graphic you showed just before my report there, you saw that overall the national swing to the Conservatives has only been something around 1% or so. Now, that may change as we get the final results in, but there were big swings in London, very disappointing swing to them in the Midlands, not enough to deliver them the kinds of seats they would need to gain if they were going to be credible as a party of government at the next election.
And looking at the Liberal Democrats, Charles Kennedy claiming this morning with success that it's the dawn of three-party politics again.
Yes, indeed, although we'll be disappointed that they didn't do better against the Conservatives. They did pick up one or two seats. They knocked out Tim Collins, the Shadow Education Secretary up in Westmoreland. They regained Taunton. They held on to Cheadle, which had been the Tories' #1 target. But nonetheless, most of their gains were at Labour's expense. And I think that will worry some in the Liberal Democrat Party who felt that they needed to reach out more to Tory voters if they were hoping to replace the Tories ultimately. And if they haven't done that, maybe the voters see them as being somewhat to the left of Labour, and that might restrict their appeal, particularly in southern England in the future.
OK, Sean, thank you very much.
Now we're going to cross to Downing Street in a moment or two, but first let's have a look at some live pictures we've got coming in for you. These are of the Prime Minister. Our helicopter shot the Prime Minister's entourage there as he's arrived in London. He flew into Luton from his constituency, Sedgefield, about an hour ago. He's on his way now to the National Portrait Gallery just off Trafalgar Square there in central London, where there's a bit of a party going on for Labour Party activists and election workers. He'll go in there and say hello and then move on, we think, to Downing Street, which is where we're heading now to talk to James Landale. Good morning to you, James. When is the Prime Minister expected there?
Well, what he's going to do, first of all, is go to the National Portrait Gallery, we think, and give a speech of some sort there before coming back to Downing Street after that. We imagine getting an hour or two sleep. He probably needs it like the rest of us. And before then, concentrating on other things, he might go and see the Queen. He's not constitutionally required to, but that tends to be the thing that the new Prime Ministers do, to formally request permission to form a government. And then, of course, there's the Cabinet reshuffle to turn his mind to.
A bit of sleep, presumably, before that, and reflect on the fact, of course, it's a historic third term. Of course, it's still, whatever it is, a big majority, but a slashed majority.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he'll know that his hands are slightly more tied for this next Parliament. He'll have to be very careful about the way he thinks about his reshuffle. It'll be very interesting to see the way in which he carries out his reshuffle. Does he carry on that sense of team, that sense of consensus? Above all, does he have Gordon Brown as part of the process, as we've seen throughout this election campaign? Does that carry on in the creation of this new government? All eyes in the Parliamentary Labour Party will be on that above anything else.
And all eyes, of course, on Gordon Brown as well, I suppose. They were joined at the hip, the two of them, more or less, during the campaign itself. Do we know where the Chancellor is?
We know that he's back in London, came down from his constituency in the middle of the night. I imagine he'll be back here at some stage today, but I imagine a lot of the Labour Party are at their party at the moment, having a modest celebration. It's nothing like the scenes we saw in 1997.
Well, James, you couldn't have set it up better for us. We're just taking live pictures there of the Prime Minister arriving at that very party. As we say, the National Portrait Gallery there in central London. Very happy-looking Mr. Blair there, and his wife, of course, Cherie, flown down this morning from Sedgefield after hearing of his victory there in his own constituency. Had a quick pint in the Trimdon Labour Club there, got on the flight, and there he is, the loyal Labour Party supporters there giving him quite a welcome.
Bit of a scuffle going on. It's been a long night, hasn't it? 10 past 6 in the morning. I wonder whether he's had any sleep at all, Dermot. But a very happy Prime Minister and Cherie Blair arriving there to celebrate after a night, a historic night for the Labour Party, and to thank the party faithful there at central London in the
well, let's just reflect on the task ahead. James Lansdale's still there for us at Downing Street. You say rapidly the Prime Minister's mind is going to turn to business. Just point out for us there, Alistair Campbell just going through the shot there, of course, very much still involved in the campaign. But James, just what are the tasks ahead for the Prime Minister in the next Parliament?
Well, I think above all, it's to try and sort of heal some of the wounds that have been opened up as a result of this election campaign. Nationally, obviously, Iraq, he has to try and put that to bed as an issue. He has to try and, as he said himself in his speech early this morning, to move on from that. In terms of specific issues coming up, there are very, very big issues facing this Parliament. Things like pension reform, council tax reform, the future of nuclear energy. Do we go forward with that, or do we go for other forms of energy creation? These are the big policy issues facing him.
James, well, plenty on his plate there. Now I think we can go to Mark Mardell. He's actually sneaked into the party himself.
Absolutely. And what's the atmosphere there like this morning, Mark?
Hello. Well, the atmosphere actually among the party workers is mixed, I suppose, because although that they are happy that they have got this historic victory, there's also tears of sorrow that they've lost some of their friends like Stephen Twigg, and who's lost his seat. I don't think they're actually reflecting on particularly what it means for Labour, but there is a contradiction in the way that they feel, and I think it'd be interesting to see what tone the Prime Minister strikes when he makes a speech in a few minutes' time inside.
Indeed, we've had a few comments from him already, haven't we, saying that he needs to respond sensibly, wisely and responsibly.
Yes, that's right, but I think that there was a difference in tone for the speech he made at his count when he looked really very, very shaken indeed. You know, he looked like a man who had been badly beaten, even though he knew that they were getting into government. And then he went down to the social club in Trimdon, had a pint and made a speech that was still saying he'd listen, but very much more positive. And I think Labour are struggling about what tone they do strike here.
The size of the majority of the first two terms rather overshadows this success of a Labour third term.
I think it will be, tremendously important. It'll perhaps change the way that they govern. I mean, I think it's very interesting listening to people like David Blunkett saying that you have to listen to the working class voter. You have to pay attention to that. They will also be looking at the composition within the Parliament of what MPs are getting into Parliament, whether they are likely to be more or less rebellious, and whether Tony Blair will be able to push ahead with his agenda. I mean, everybody I've been talking to, the Blairites, the Labour Party activists, have been saying that read the manifesto. It is talking about a very a positive agenda of reform and change in the public service, but they obviously have to think very carefully about whether they can actually achieve that with the majority that they have.
Mark, Dermot here, just to ask you about what's actually going on inside the party. I know you're outside there, but presumably you've talked to a few of the people in there. Just looking at the shot that we can see, it does seem rather subdued. I mean, a few people swinging from a couple of bottles of beer, but, they've won the historic third term. There doesn't seem to be an air of euphoria.
I think they're being very careful about that. I mean, we were told earlier on that, well, they weren't even calling it a party earlier on. They were saying it was a results service, and they were saying, well, what was going on inside, any champagne? And they said, no, absolutely no champagne, only beer and wine. Well, actually, I've seen a few people swigging champagne, so there was champagne inside. But it's this dilemma. How do they play it? Of course they're pleased that they've got a historic victory. Of course it's important for them that the Labour Party has done that. But they don't want to seem triumphalist. They don't want to seem like they're crowing. I presume that the Prime Minister's words will reflect that he's listening to all that has been said to him by the electorate, and they're not going to look as though they just sort of bagged a victory and that's it.
We're just hearing a bit of clapping there, and I think we can see on the screen, in our screen, which is inside the National Portrait Gallery, the Prime Minister is about to get on the stage or the podium or whatever they've got there and say a few words. We'll try and stay with it until we hear the Prime Minister, Mark. But of course, I was asking James Landale at Downing Street, I mean, the other character, the other central character for Labour in this campaign is, of course, the Chancellor, Gordon Brown, very much leaving this moment, though, to Tony Blair, isn't he?
Yes, I mean, Gordon Brown is inside the party, or at least he went in and I haven't seen him leave. And it was noticeable that, and at times like this, you tend to examine every single word that somebody says. But Gordon Brown said he would look forward to implementing what was in Labour's manifesto. And as I've said, that the manifesto is a symbol for the Blairite agenda. Maybe the way the campaign was fought was the way that Gordon Brown wanted it fought. But the Blairites keep saying, well, look at what's in the manifesto. There's lots of stuff about public service reform. Actually, it's very vague. It doesn't really give details, any flesh on the bones. But I think that those in the Prime Minister's camp will take heart from the fact that the Chancellor, when he came in here, it was one of the very first things he said was about implementing that manifesto.
Mark, do we know what's happening for the rest of the day now?
Not precisely, but obviously after the speech here, the Prime Minister will go to Downing Street. He may go to see the Queen. He doesn't officially have to, but it's politeness, it's a formality. But I'm sure he will actually get a bit of sleep. And then he'll focus his mind on the reshuffle. The Prime Minister, we're told, is actually pretty superstitious. And before an election has been won, he doesn't like concentrating on the things that he'll have to do almost immediately in government. But I think he's going to turn his mind to the reshuffle. I mean, things I've been hearing are that the Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw, is safe. He's going to keep his job. We know that Gordon Brown's going to keep his job. Ruth Kelly will keep hers. Charles Clarke will stay as Home Secretary. They need a new Chief Secretary. David Miliband, perhaps, go into that job. It's possible that Tessa Jowell will be moved to Health and John Reid to Defence. Those are just possibilities that when one's playing the game of reshuffles, those sort of names come up. But I don't think it's going to be very extensive or profound.
Mark, we're still just trying to work out whether we're going to be able to see the Prime Minister give his victory address to the loyal troops there. We're seeing a rather strange shot ourselves at the moment of the crowd in the National Portrait Gallery, a monitor in the background on which I think we can see some comings and goings. Perhaps the Prime Minister is about to speak in a moment or two.
Doesn't look terribly exciting, does it, at the moment? But I think that what Labour are going to have to do when this initial period of celebration or whatever is over, and when they've got some kit, is analyse what this result means. Because earlier on in the evening, the people were saying, well, it was exactly what we told you. The Iraq effect sent people either to stay at home or to vote Lib Dem, and that's what's cut our majority. Now, I'm not sure, and I've been standing out here for quite a long time, so I haven't been poring over papers and figures, but I'm not sure that's correct. It seems to me that there is a genuine Conservative recovery, at least in parts of London and the South East, and that could be more worrying for Tony Blair in a sense than the Iraq effect, because, of course, Iraq is in the past, and however strongly people feel about it, it's something that's gone and presumably is not likely to be repeated. But if now Tony Blair is actually moving through the crowd now, shaking hands, people holding up mobile phones to take a historic photograph of him, looking very pleased actually now, smiling, he's among friends. I mean, I'd contrast the look on his face there to the look that we saw when he was actually up at his own count, a very sort of rictus grin then, but this looks more like genuine pleasure.
The analysis of the results are very interesting, aren't they, Mark? Despite the fact that the majority is significantly reduced, this is an historic victory for Labour.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, people mustn't forget that it is a historic victory. This has never been done before, and those close to Tony Blair would say that he did it. He forged a new sort of Labour Party that could manage to win 3 victories in a row, even if the third victory was with a much reduced majority. And it looks like he is now going to speak, so let's hear what the Prime Minister is going to say to the loyal party members there.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. And it's, well, what does it feel like to be part? What's it? How does it feel to be part of a third-term Labour government? You've just been... I want to say something to you, all you who've worked for the party over these past few weeks. I've just never come across such a dedicated, fantastic, wonderful group of people. You're wonderful. Now, I'd like to say, I'm going to say thank you to a few of the politicians, to my deputy, John Prescott. Where is John? Where is he? There he is. Just done an amazing job. To go, where's Gordon? Gordon, where is there? Our Chancellor, Gordon. To Alan Milburn. And where's Ian McCartney? Is Ian McCartney around here? Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? He's a bit small, no one noticed him there. But more than any of the politicians, it's you that should be thanked. Matt Carter, our General Secretary, and all the staff. Just an amazing job. And I know it's been very tough and hard at points over these past few weeks. But I think we can be really proud of what we've achieved. And we can be very determined and committed as to what we can achieve now. Absolutely. We've got a mandate to govern this country again. Yes, there are good comrades that have fallen. But there are also extraordinary results that have come through tonight. And we've got to listen to the people and respond wisely and sensibly. But they have made it very clear. They wanted to carry on with Labour and not go back to the Tory years. And for some of us, we've got so many young people around now, some of you won't remember, but we were in opposition once. In fact, we were in opposition rather a long time, about 18 years to be accurate about it. And during those 18 years, we learnt the value of taking tough decisions. And we also learnt the value of working together and realizing that nothing was more important than to put our principles into power. And I think we can be proud of what we've achieved in these past 8 years. But I tell you, we can achieve so much more in the next 4 years if we put our minds to it. 13 years ago, we had just lost our 4th election in a row. 13 years ago, they said the Labour Party could never win an election again. Then we won, and then we won again. And this time, we've secured the mandate for the first time for a 3rd time. And it's an extraordinary achievement. But do you know how we've done it? We've done it by becoming a party that is true to its values of solidarity and social justice and opportunity for all, but making sure that we never let up on the necessity of applying those values to the modern reality in which we live. And I think we can build on that now for the years ahead. But we can only do it if we keep the same sense of solidarity that we believe in as a principle within our organisation. And it's an amazing thing throughout the whole of this campaign, when I've gone and visited different parts of the country and I've seen the party organisation at work. It's been awesome. It's been brilliant, because you have so much to put up with. Some of the things coming in and out every day that have distracted us from the task of putting our agenda before the country, but at no point did you ever waver. You have been the most extraordinary group of people I have ever come across. I feel, no, thank you. Actually, I love you and I'm proud of you. So there you go. 3rd term. First time, 3rd term. Let's go out and make the most of it for us and for the country. Thank you. The night is but young. Have a great time. Thank you.
Well, with that, the night is but young, says the Prime Minister, a very happy man, celebrating his 3rd term victory with all the key players in the audience there. Mark Mardell, our correspondent, watching and listening to the events there. Mark, the Prime Minister did much to thank the dedicated and wonderful group of people, to quote him directly, that supported him throughout this campaign.
Yes, I mean, this is a Labour Party activist party, and so part of his job here was to thank them and say how wonderful they were. He also thanked the Chancellor and John Prescott and Alan Milburn. But I think more importantly than that, he went on to say that they must listen. They must learn and listen from this vote. Now, I'm looking forward in the coming hours to asking Labour Party people what exactly that means. What is it that they're going to listen to? How do you listen to a protest vote about Iraq? What else do they think that people were telling them? But he also made it quite clear that this 3rd victory was due, in his view, to the party being New Labour. He talked about their traditional values of social solidarity, but how they must be applied in a modern age. I mean, that is saying we are going to carry on being New Labour.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. We'll leave you there with the scene of celebration there at National Portrait Gallery.
Now coming up in the next half hour, what the voters make of this morning's result breakfast. Bill Turnbull is in Eastbourne. Bill.
Morning. I developed a bit of a sideline down here in Eastbourne. Yeah, it's just a little gaff of mine. We've come down to a regular kind of place to talk to regular kinds of people about what they think about last night's election result. Does it leave you feeling like there's a bright new sunny dawn as there is here in Eastbourne, or is it looking rather gloomy? In short, do you give a hoot about last night's election? He does. Let's join our news teams across the UK. See you in a minute. Well done. Thanks very much.
Good morning from BBC London News. I'm Asad Ahmed. It's been a bad night for Labour in London. The new political makeup of the capital looks quite different. In the capital, there's been a swing of nearly 5% from Labour to the Conservatives. But Labour also lost a key safe seat in Bethnal Green and Bow. Una King narrowly lost what was a 10,000 majority to the Respect Party candidate, George Galloway. The result followed a tense and vitriolic election campaign in the East London seat, which has a large number of Muslim voters. There were some significant Conservative gains in London too, largely at Labour's expense. The Conservatives' first win of the evening was in Putney with Justine Greening. Another Tory gain was Enfield Southgate, where former London Schools Minister Stephen Twigg was toppled with a swing of 8.7%. And there were Tory gains in Ilford North, in Wimbledon, Hammersmith, Bexley, Hemel Hempstead, Guildford, Hornchurch and St Albans. And the first ever black Tory MP, Adam Afriyie, managed to hold Windsor for the Tories. Well, Lib Dem London Assembly member Lynn Featherstone beat off Labour's Barbara Roche in Hornsey and Wood Green, and Sarah Tether clung on to her Brent East constituency that she won from Labour in a by-election in 2003. So that's a roundup of what's been going on election night. Let's find out what's been going on the roads now with Kate Allen. Morning, Kate.
Good morning, Assad. If you are heading out and about this morning, I'm going to start with some very good news. We've got no reported problems at the moment on public transport. The Underground running OK through London and also the overground trains as well. Now, looking at the roads, not too bad. Obviously, it's quite early in the morning. Building up just a little bit coming in westbound. That's through the Limehouse Link Tunnel towards the highway and eventually towards East Smithfield. Once you've done East Smithfield, you'll get towards Tower Bridge. Now, this is on the south side. Those cones are still out and about this morning. They're going to be out until Sunday. That's for the maintenance work. Traffic is being diverted. Cyclists, though, and pedestrians are allowed to cross the bridge on foot. However, vehicles have to use London Bridge or Southwark Bridge, so expect some delays through there. London Bridge at the moment, not looking too bad. Relatively OK coming in towards central London this morning. When traffic starts to build up, though, it will start to look very busy. A5 Edgware Road down to Marble Arch, not too bad. Northbound, though, we do have some roadworks, so expect some delays. Blackwall Tunnel just beginning to build up there. That's heading from the Woolwich Road flyover. That's it from me, Assad.
Kate, thanks very much. Look at the weather forecast now. This will be mainly dry with some sunny intervals, turning cloudy later. The top temperature will reach 16 degrees Celsius. Now, BBC London has a team of election experts on hand to answer your questions on the BBC London Election Special programme from 9 o'clock this morning with Emily Maitlis. Send us your questions to our usual address. That address is on the screen now, yourlondon@bbc.co.uk. We look forward to getting those emails. Kate and I are back in half an hour's time. Do join us then if you can. Bye-bye for now.
This is Breakfast with Natasha, Kaplinsky and Dermot Murnaghan.
Our main news this morning, Tony Blair has won an historic third successive election, but with a much reduced majority.
With most of the seats declared, the latest prediction is a Labour majority of 66 seats. And this is the state of the parties a short while ago. Labour are on 351, having lost 46 seats. The Conservatives, 191. They've gained 31 seats. The Liberal Democrats are up 12 on 59. Plaid Cymru are down 1 to 3. And the Scottish National Party have gained 2 seats. They stand on 6. And 3 seats went to other parties.
Now, if we translate that into a share of the vote, Labour took 36.6%. That's down 5.9% on the last time. It's also the lowest ever share of the vote for a winning party. Looking at the Conservatives now, well, they were up 0.5% on 32.9, while the Liberal Democrats took 22.4%, up 3.9.
Now we're just going over to Downing Street. Those of you that know central London will know it's not far from the National Portrait Gallery, 210 Downing Street. The Prime Minister just left the Labour Party faithful party there, and there he is, the traditional photo call.
Happy birthday, Prime Minister.
The winning Prime Minister entering once more the door of number 10.
Well, the Prime Minister said that the British people wanted a return of a Labour government, but, quote, with a reduced majority. And he promised to respond to that sensibly and wisely and also responsibly. The Conservatives said that the public had wanted to cut Tony Blair down to size and to make him more accountable. And the Liberal Democrats said that they were now the only truly national party and were becoming the real challengers to Labour.
Well, we'll hear from all the main parties this morning here on Breakfast. But first, our political correspondent Sean Lay now reports on the night Britain's electoral landscape changed.
Anthony Charles Linton Blair, 24,421.
Tony Blair didn't look like a man who just made history. He's the first Labour leader to win 3 successive terms in Downing Street. But his party has just been re-elected with the smallest share of the vote of any government.
It's not yet clear, obviously, what the majority is. It seems as if it's clear, but also that the British people wanted the return of a Labour government, but with a reduced majority. And we have to respond to that sensibly and wisely and responsibly. We have to make sure that we focus on the things that matter to people, the things that they've talked about to me during the course of this campaign.
One possible explanation, Iraq. Reg Keys, who stood against Mr Blair in protest at the death of his son in the war, delivered a blunt message.
I hope in my heart that one day the Prime Minister may be able to say sorry. That one day he will say sorry to the families of the bereaved.
8 years ago, it was Stephen Twiggs' unexpected victory against Michael Portillo which summed up the Labour landslide. His defeat this time illustrated the bigger-than-expected swing back to the Tories in London.
Shapps Grant V, the Conservative Party candidate, 22,100.
Other Labour ministers suffered a similar fate. Although Michael Howard has led the Conservatives to their third successive election defeat, he thinks his party's performance vindicates his leadership.
What has happened on this election day marks a significant step towards our recovery. I am proud of the campaign that we have fought. We have taken a stand on the things that really do matter to the people of our country. We have sent a message to Mr Blair.
It began well for the Tories, defeating Labour in Putney, but a good night in London was not matched elsewhere in the country. Edgbaston was the party's most winnable seat in Birmingham, but it was Labour who were left smiling both in the Midlands and in much of the north. Charles Kennedy ended the night well pleased by his party's performance, especially the gains made at Labour's expense.
And I think that the era of three-party politics right across the United Kingdom is now with us. That is something that I welcome. I think it is a healthy development.
But not in the way he'd intended. The Liberal Democrats had wanted to defeat leading Tories, but the decapitation strategy largely failed. David Davis holding his seat and only one member of the Conservatives' top team being ousted. Instead, the party's big gains were against Labour. In seats like Newbury, voters returned to the Tories, perhaps a sign that they now perceive the Liberal Democrats as being to the left of Labour. If so, that will alarm party strategists. Whilst the SNP made gains in Scotland, it was a disappointing night for Plaid Cymru, which lost a seat and failed to win its top target. Wales also saw the Tories win seats for the first time since 1997. For Labour, the sourest moment came towards the end of the night. The anti-war MP George Galloway narrowly won Bethnal Green after a bitter, ill-tempered campaign. His presence in the new Parliament will be a daily reminder to Tony Blair of the electoral price his party seems to have paid over Iraq. Sean Lay, BBC News.
Well, there's a declaration coming in. We can go there live right away. It's in Ludlow.
The Independence Party, 783. A total of 167 papers were elected. The turnout they will bring you in. 72% of the registered electors. And I do hereby declare that the said Philip Martin Dunn is duly elected.
Here, the returning officer giving the results. So it is a crucial one, this, of course. It's number 22 on the Tory target list. It was held in the last Parliament by the Liberal Democrats, and it appears there that the Conservatives have taken it from the Liberal Democrats.
We're going to leave that. We can't get the sound adequately enough to hear what's going on there. But another game for the Tories there. The time's 6:38 now, and we're going to get the view from Downing Street with our political correspondent, James Landale. Good morning to you, James. And only a few moments ago, the Prime Minister walked back into number 10, this time, again, a Prime Minister.
To how I was here all those years ago in 1997. Then the whole of Downing Street was packed full of screaming, cheering school children who'd all been bussed in for the day, all of them waving flags. The Prime Minister and Cherie Blair arrived at the gate and they walked up in prime ministerial, magisterial, triumphal joy. None of that today, just a straightforward, business-like arrival in the car, get in, have a quick wave to the cameras and then inside, presumably to get a bit of sleep as soon as possible.
It wasn't too long ago, James, that we heard his speech at the National Portrait Gallery, thanking the party faithful, thanking those that helped him win this historic victory tonight. But we understand it won't be too long before he turns his mind to business.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I imagine he'll get a couple of hours kip and then start turning his mind to the reshuffle. All his aides always say that the Prime Minister is incredibly superstitious about this. They will have spent, Jonathan Powell, as Chief of Staff, will have spent much of yesterday up in Trimdon, his constituency, trying to sort of push lists in front of him, saying, look, Prime Minister, we need to think about this. And the Prime Minister was saying, no, I don't want to even think about that, except in some of the broader ideas, because he's very superstitious before he gets the result. So he'll turn his attention to that now, and we expect today at some stage we'll get some of the broader themes of this reshuffle, probably the cabinet, and then over the rest of the weekend the lesser junior ministers, where there is an expectation there will be quite a large shake-up. But in the cabinet level, we're expecting more steady as she goes, a modest change here or there.
James, thank you very much.
Well, clearly a fascinating night, and here to talk us through the figures in more detail is David Cowling, the head of BBC Political Research, and Ben Page from the polling organisation Mori. A very good morning to you. David, if we could start with you. The Prime Minister's been saying he must listen and respond to what the electorate have been telling him, but what is the national message? Is it first and foremost about Iraq?
I think Iraq has played a key role in a number of seats, but the central message actually of the election is broadly the same as the campaign, namely that the Conservatives don't appear to have moved at all. If they're on 33%, then that's the same as it was in 2001, which was their second worst result since 1832. Labour has bled away, seeped away support principally to the Liberal Democrats and to others, and has paid the heavy price for it. So it seems that the two major parties are the ones who have caused both of them to reflect. Labour most obviously, but I think the Conservatives have things to worry about too.
I see inflicted wounds on each other. I mean, Ben Page, did the polls tell us this story fairly consistently throughout the campaign?
The polls have had a good campaign, actually. If you look at the exit poll, which is on the nail, I think the current predicted majority is 66, exactly as the exit poll said. And actually, if you look at the share of the votes with the final opinion polls, they're all very much within what's actually happened. So I think that's interesting. I think that the really key thing, however, that we need to remember, it is a historic victory for Tony Blair, but fewer people voted for him than voted for Kinnock in 1992.
This is an extraordinary feature, isn't it, David Cowling, that 37% of the vote, yet they've got a very big majority.
Yes, but that's part of our first-past-the-post system by which all of them live and die, and which the Lib Dems obviously complain about. But certainly he has a majority that's going to see him through, but there must be some very serious questions about his leadership and about how long he stays. I would have suspected myself this sort of majority means he's going to go sooner rather than later. And
we were hearing from Charles Kennedy that he's saying this is an era, Ben Page, now of genuine three-party politics. Does it really look like that?
I think the short answer is not quite, Lord Copper. We're not there yet. I mean, they haven't made the gains that, weeks ago people were talking about them getting up to 80 seats. That just hasn't happened. And really, it's the Conservatives who've been making some of the pace. But their share of the vote is up. It's just not necessarily in the right seats.
I mean, it's funny looking at the national picture, David Cowling, that in actual fact things have smoothed out, and by and large we've got this reflection in the national polls. But there were a series of rather different regional battles going on here.
There certainly were. The Conservatives have made inroads into London, but this has been an extraordinary election. I mean, Hove stayed Labour, for goodness sake, and then Hornsey and Wood Green's 10,000 Labour majority disappeared. It is, I mean, when we look at the entrails of this, I think it's going to be a fascinating election. One of the reasons why the polls, Ben's absolutely right, were very, very good, but the polls take the country as if it's one constituency. But what has emerged in this election, more strikingly than anything I've seen for a long time, is the variations. And you're right, in the regions, in the West Midlands, it didn't seem to me that the Tories made any breakthrough. But in other regions, London, they did well, and in other places, the Lib Dems gained, but they also lost. It's quite remarkable.
I can see it's going to keep you two going for months to come. David, Ben, thank you both very much indeed.
Much more comment throughout the morning here on Breakfast. The time 6:43. If you've just joined us, let's recap now on the main news that you're waking up to. Tony Blair has led Labour to a third successive victory. He'll have a majority of about 66 after the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats made some gains at Labour's expense. But Labour's share of the vote was the lowest ever for a winning party.
Well, the Prime Minister said the victory was an extraordinary achievement, and he promised to build on his achievements. He said he would respond to what the British people wanted, sensibly and wisely and responsibly.
Well, the Conservative leader, Michael Howard, said that the time had now come for action and not talk from Mr Blair. He called on the Labour leader to, quote, deliver on the things that really matter to the people of our country.
And the Liberal Democrats achieved their best result for more than 80 years. And their leader, Charles Kennedy, said Britain no longer had a two-party political system.
Much more political analysis throughout the morning here on Breakfast. Now, though, analysis of the weather picture with Carol. Good morning.
Good morning. Today we're looking at sunshine and showers predominantly across the UK, and in fact the same could be said for this coming weekend. This weekend too we'll still have a cool, brisk wind, and then for the early part of next week as things settle down, it looks like we could once again be in that risk of frost category. This morning then a lot of showers around, especially so affecting Scotland but not exclusively. We've also got them this morning round about Cheshire, heading into Hereford and Worcester, and also in some eastern parts of England. Some of us getting away to a dry and bright start with some sunshine, variable amounts of cloud, and if anything thicker cloud in the southwest of England. And here too we've got just a wee spot of drizzle. Now through the day that thicker cloud will extend into Northern Ireland, producing some rain, and by evening the rain here will be quite heavy. But for the rest of us, a windy day, again with bright spells or sunshine hazy at times, and top temperatures of 16 degrees Celsius, which is 61 Fahrenheit. So if we pick up the rain in Northern Ireland this evening, it will through the course of the night progress across England and Wales, eventually clearing the southeast early on tomorrow, and it's going to be accompanied probably by quite windy conditions, maybe even gusts to gale force around the coast. As a result, not a particularly cold night in the south, but cold in the north, maybe cold enough in sheltered glens for a touch of frost. That's it. Back to you two.
Carol, thank you very much.
Well, it wouldn't be an election, of course, without Peter Snow. So let's work through those results with the king of the swing-ometer. Here's Peter.
Well, here we have it. It's a Labour victory, all right, but it's less of a one than last time. I'm now going to show you that the map is colouring up, flashing the gains here. More blue than it was last time, more gold than it was last time for Liberal Democrat. Start in London. You can see a substantial number of Tory gains there. And George Galloway, by the way, coming and taking Bethnal Green as an independent, that grey one in the middle of town there. And as you go up the map, so you see a lot of these Tory gains going out into the countryside here. The Tories with about 31 net gains altogether, and the Liberal Democrats a dozen or so. The Tories even back in Scotland, in Dumfriesshire here, flashing away there. And the swing all over the country, an average swing of 3% to the Tories. They did better in the marginals. That's why they're doing rather better than that swing would suggest. Now, the crucial story in this election has been that Mr Blair had 80 seats in the old House of Commons that comprised his majority. He had to hold on to enough of these seats, each of them with little figures on there, as you can see, mainly in the Midlands, the North and the South East, there in clusters around the conurbations. He had to hold on enough of these seats to retain his majority. And here they go. I'm going to put them up now on Blair's battleground. We've numbered them from 1 to 80. Top left is the most marginal, bottom right are the least marginal. So the safest ones for Mr Blair are over that side, the unsafest ones up over here, the easiest ones for the Tories and Liberal Democrats to turn blue and gold here. Let's see what's actually happened then in Blair's battleground. There you are, a lot of successes for the Tories and Liberal Democrats in the first 2 or 3 columns, but by the time you get down here, apart from a few parachutists up here like Gravesham, on the whole, the Labour Party is surviving. Let's just bunch them together now and you'll see exactly how many gains we can reckon the Tories will end up with. 31 net gains, the Tories, a couple of independents here winning, most unusual election, a couple of Scottish National Party. Otherwise, the Labour Party holding on in just under half of these vital seats that they really had to hold on to retain their majority. So, there it is, a majority for Tony Blair of 66 forecast on a share of the vote that looks like this. Here we have the share of the vote all over the country, 36% Labour, just 3% ahead of the Tories. The Liberal Democrats on 23, and there are the others there on 8%. Now, that share of the vote, if that's what it ends up as, looks as if it will, that share of the vote will be the lowest winning party's share of the vote in British electoral history.
Well, there we go, the inimitable Peter Snow. Now, it's been an interesting night for Labour's veteran MP, Bob Marshall-Andrews. First, he announced that he conceded defeat in his Medway seat, and then later in the night, it emerged that he'd actually won by a very slim 213 votes.
Well, is he pleased? But will Tony Blair be? Well, Bob Marshall-Andrews joins us now. A bit of a debacle over your seat overnight. A very slim victory, and in the meantime, you marked your card even more with the Prime Minister.
Well, I did, yes. It was a very, very slim victory indeed. At the early stage, I didn't quite concede defeat, but I did say, quite objectively, and in the Prime Minister's words, I honestly and genuinely believed it, that we'd lost, and it looked as though we'd lost in the early part of the count, and in the end, we just scraped home. So I'm pretty unapologetic about the error, but I'm very pleased that we scraped home.
The result in general, what do you think this means for Labour?
I think it's seismic from Labour's point of view. I've just been listening to the Prime Minister, and I must say I was very disappointed in the speech that he made to our supporters in the party in London. It completely lacked contrition. We are now governing on effectively 20% of the electorate. We have lost a massive number of votes since 1997, which was a legacy bequeathed to him by John Smith and Neil Kinnock. And everybody who fought this campaign knows that Tony Blair was our biggest electoral liability, not an asset. And so I think actually the tone that's coming from the Prime Minister does need a bit of adjustment here.
Well, Tony Blair didn't perhaps get the bloody nose that everybody predicted. As you said, the result seismic, but nevertheless he has gained the third victory for the Labour Party, which does go down in history.
Of course it does, yes, and I've been a member of the Labour Party for 35 years and I rejoice in it. But one must look at the nature of the victory you're getting. I mean, when we started in 1997, we had an enormous mandate. Now, in truth, our mandate has shrivelled. And there are many backbench Labour members of Parliament who simply will not tolerate any more, let's forget Iraq, but any more of the authoritarian government, the attacks on jury trial, detention without trial, that sort of thing, will simply not tolerate it now that we have a smaller majority. So I think the Prime Minister, instead of congratulating himself on a third term, which was in truth won by the Labour Party, probably Gordon Brown in spite of him, would do very well to consider his own future and also his own programme.
We shall wait and see. Bob Marshall-Andrews, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
We've heard plenty from the politicians this morning, but what do the people who actually cast their votes make of the result?
Well, Bill Turnbull is getting some food for thought at, where else? Bill's Cafe in Eastbourne. Good morning to you, Bill.
Morning, Natasha. Yes, come down to my special little gaff here in Eastbourne, because we're saying never mind the expert analysis and your points for and your points against and your percentage swings and all that. We want to find out what real people think. The man in the street, well, actually, he's the man in the caff this morning. And here with us this morning is David, reading his Eastbourne Herald. Very finely dressed, if I might say, David. What do you think about what happened last night in the election?
Well, I'm pleased.
You're pleased?
Yeah.
Were you excited about it at all? Did you bother to watch?
No.
Why not?
I'm too busy.
Too busy doing other things?
Yeah.
All right, that's one opinion. Let's turn now to Darren here, who took an interest in the local election result, because that's been fought over for the past 15 years, hasn't it, between the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. What happened?
The Conservatives won again for a fourth term, about majority, about 1,100.
So what's your view about that?
I would have preferred the Lib Dems to get in.
Right. And overall, the situation nationally, what do you think?
I think it was pretty bad for Labour. They lost about 100 seats eventually, by the sounds of it. So that was pretty good. I just wanted one of the other parties to get in.
All right. Hamish, what did you think about the election overall?
I didn't think it was, in personalities, I didn't think there was a personality that could beat Tony Blair. I think the other two parties have seriously got to look at their leaders and seriously pick a personality. The Conservatives, Michael Howard did a good job here, and I would have liked them to have got in, but they've got to go for a younger man, and they've got to be more dynamic.
OK, thank you very much. We're just going to get a quick word from the management here. The self-appointed spokesman for Bill's Cafe this morning is Vinny. Morning, Vinny. Did you stay up last night to watch it?
Yes, I did. I watched a lot of it, yeah.
Right, what did you think?
Well, no real shocks, but Blair's got back in. As long as he concentrates on immigration, education, the NHS, then hopefully it'll be OK, you know. But apart from that, as I say, no real shocks.
All right, so generally, overall, you feel reasonably satisfied?
Yeah, you know.
All right, Vinny, I'll let you get back into the kitchen, because we saw, you know, Peter Snow's marvellous technical stuff and all that, all the graphics on the computer. We've got something very special for you here at Bill's Cafe, though. Stay with us, come back to us later, because we're going to have the election on a plate. See you later.
Done in baked beans and sausages.
Yeah.
We can't wait, Bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. And you can find out much more about the election results from our interactive television service. If you're watching digitally, you can press red to access our multi-screen. Now, throughout the programme, you'll also be able to catch up with all the highlights and the results.
And if you haven't got a red button, a full results service is available on CFAX page 700 or on our website. It's at bbc.co.uk/election 2005, all one word.
In the next hour here on Breakfast, we're going to be having a full roundup of all the results and all the political reaction. And of course, Peter Snow with his swingometer.
Now we join our news teams across the UK.
Good morning from BBC London News. I'm Asad Ahmed. It's been a bad night for Labour in London. Take a look at the new political map. There's been a swing of nearly 5% from Labour to the Conservatives. But Labour also lost a key safe seat in Bethnal Green and Bow. Una King narrowly lost what was a 10,000 majority to the Respect Party candidate George Galloway. The result followed a tense and vitriolic election campaign in the East London seat, which has a large number of Muslim voters. Speaking after his win, Mr Galloway launched a scathing attack on the Prime Minister.
Mr Blair, this is for Iraq. This defeat that you have suffered and all the other defeats that New Labour has suffered this evening is for Iraq. All the people you killed, all the lies you told have come back to haunt you. And the best thing the Labour Party could do is sack you tomorrow morning as soon as they get back to work.
Well, there were some significant Conservative gains in London too, largely at Labour's expense. The Conservatives' first win of the evening was in Putney, with Justine Greening. Another Tory gain and Labour casualty was in Enfield Southgate, where former London Schools Minister Stephen Twigg was toppled with a swing of 8.7%. And there were Tory gains in Ilford North, Wimbledon, Hammersmith, Bexley Heath, Hemel Hempstead, Guildford, Hornchurch and St Albans. And the first ever black Tory MP, Adam Afriyie, managed to hold on to the Windsor seat. Well, Lib Dem London Assembly member Lynn Featherstone beat off Labour's Barbara Roach in Hornsey and Wood Green, and Sarah Tether clung on to her Brent East constituency, which she won from Labour in the 2003 by-election. Well, a number of minor parties have seen their votes go up. In Barking and Essex, the British National Party polled 17% of the vote. And as we've seen, George Galloway's victory in Bethnal Green meant Respect averaged nearly 5% of the areas they stood in for election. In West Ham, in particular, nearly 1 in 5 people voted for the party. So the final tally of London seats is 44 to Labour, 20 to the Conservatives and 8 to the Lib Dems. And Croydon Central is the only London constituency yet to declare. It's currently on a third recount. So that's an election roundup. Let's get the travel news now with Kate Allen. Morning, Kate.
Good morning, Assad. If you are heading out and about, the good news of the bulletin is if you are heading onto public transport, we've got no reported problems on the tubes this morning, and even the overground trains are looking good as well. So it's a good day to hop onto public transport. Now, looking at the roads, not quite a good picture. If you're heading onto the A2, here's the picture London bound, traffic building up already. This is past the A205 South Circular at Westthorne Avenue through Eltham up towards the Kidbrooke interchange. The Blackwall Tunnel not looking too bad. We'll see that a little bit later on. On the westbound carriageway of the North Circular, traffic already starting to look very busy, very slow into the Clockhouse interchange at Palmer's Green, and then it continues to snarl up westbound around towards Bowes Road. In central London, of course, Tower Bridge closed again this morning. It'll remain closed until Sunday. Both directions, no traffic allowed to use it unless you're on foot using a cycle or pedestrian. You have to divert, unfortunately, via London Bridge, which already is looking very busy London bound or heading up in towards the city this morning. Also building up around the Rotherhithe Tunnel at the moment on the south side of the river. A5 Edgware Road building up a little bit southbound into Marble Arch. Northbound we've got some roadworks which will cause delays a bit later. Assad.
Kate, thanks very much for that. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Susan Powell.
Good morning. Plenty of dry and fine weather to come for us today. There would also be some sunshine around at times, but it could just be a little bit hit and miss as we go on and off throughout the day. I think this morning will start bright and sunny, but we could see some cloud bubbling up as we head on into the afternoon. And by the end of the day, things actually could be looking quite grey. But thanks to an early start with the sunshine, temperatures today should get up to 16 or 17 at best. That's the low 60s Fahrenheit. It will, though, always feel a touch cooler than this, thanks to quite a brisk northwesterly breeze. We keep that breeze going on into the weekend, and it looks like through Saturday and Sunday, the wind could even carry in a scattering of showers from time to time. So a little bit of a mixed outlook for the next few days, but at least today looks like it will be fine and settled. This weekend also promises some good sunny spells for most of us, but just watch out for that risk of 1 or 2 showers.
Now, just before we go, time to remind you that BBC London has a team of election experts on hand to answer your questions on the BBC London Election Special programme from 9 o'clock this morning. That's with Emily Maitlis. Send us your questions to our usual address, yourlondon@bbc.co.uk. The address is on the screen there. Kate and I will be back in half an hour with more election updates. We'll see you then. Bye for now.
Once upon a time, 3 best friends were looking for happiness, dreaming of love, kids and successful careers. Shyla grabbed the Prince Charming of Chigwell, who whisked her away to his castle. I just hope she doesn't get trapped there. Far, far away from home, Tanya climbed the career ladder. I'm just worried who she'll step on to get to the top. And me, Sunita, I got my happy ever after. 2 great kids, a husband, a mortgage and cellulite. But is this it? We're all looking for our happy ending, but life isn't all ha-ha-he-he.
New drama starring Meera Syal starts Tuesday at 9 on BBC One.
Hello, very good morning to you. You're watching Breakfast with Dermot Murnaghan and Natasha Kaplinsky.
Thank you! Tony Blair wins an historic 3rd term as Prime Minister, but Labour's majority is slashed.
That's our main story here on Breakfast. It's Friday, the 6th of May.
Good morning, thanks for joining us. Also on today's programme, Tony Blair admits he'll have to listen to the message from the voters.
We've got to listen to the people and respond wisely and sensibly. But they have made it very clear. They wanted to carry on with Labour and not go back to the Tory years.
Gains for Conservatives. Michael Howard admits defeat but insists the result is a turning point.
And gains for the Liberal Democrats as well. Charles Kennedy declares it's the birth of an era of 3-party politics.
Also coming up, the Iraq effect as anti-war candidate George Galloway wins in Bethnal Green. We assess the effect of the conflict on the voting.
And, of course, it wouldn't be an election without Peter Snow. All the twists, the turns, the upsets. Peter will be here to tell us how the race was won.
Our main news of the morning. Tony Blair has won an historic 3rd successive election, but with a much reduced majority.
With most of the seats now declared, the latest prediction is a majority for Labour of 66. And this is the state of the parties a short while ago. Labour are on 351 seats, having lost 46. The Conservatives, they have 192, gaining 32. The Liberal Democrats have put on 11 seats at 59. Plaid Cymru have lost 1, they're down to 3, and the SNP have gained 2, they're on 6, and 3 seats went to other parties.
So if we translate that into a share of the overall vote, Labour took 36.4%, that's down 5.8% on last time. It's also the lowest ever share of the vote for a winning party. The Conservatives were up 0.6% on 33.1, while the Liberal Democrats took 22.6%, up 3.9.
Well, the Prime Minister said the British people wanted a return of a Labour government, but with a reduced majority, and he promised to respond to that sensibly and wisely and responsibly. The Conservatives said the public had wanted to cut Tony Blair down to size and make him more accountable, and the Liberal Democrats said they were now the only truly national party and were becoming the real challengers to Labour.
We're going to be hearing from all the main parties here on Breakfast this morning, but first, our political correspondent Sean Lay has the story of the night.
Tony Blair returned to London this morning after securing a 3rd successive term as Prime Minister. It's a record equalled only by Margaret Thatcher. But there's another side to this victory. It's been secured on the smallest share of the vote ever won by a government. Still, Mr Blair told party workers they should be well pleased with the result.
We've got a mandate to govern this country again. Yes, there are good comrades that have fallen, but there are also extraordinary results that have come through tonight. And we've got to listen to the people and respond wisely and sensibly. But they have made it very clear. They wanted to carry on with Labour and not go back to the Tory years.
One possible explanation for his smaller majority, Iraq. Earlier at his own count in Sedgefield, Mr Blair listened as Reg Keyes, who stood against him in protest at the death of his son in the war, delivered a blunt message.
I hope in my heart that one day the Prime Minister may be able to say sorry. That one day he will say sorry to the families of the bereaved.
8 years ago, it was Stephen Twiggs' unexpected victory against Michael Portillo which summed up the Labour landslide. His defeat this time illustrated the bigger-than-expected swing back to the Tories in London.
Hereby declare Shapps Grant V, the Conservative Party candidate, 22,100.
Other Labour ministers suffered a similar fate. Although Michael Howard has led the Conservatives to their third successive election defeat, he thinks his party's performance vindicates his leadership.
What has happened on this election day marks a significant step towards our recovery. I am proud of the campaign that we have fought. We have taken a stand on the things that really do matter to the people of our country. We have sent a message to Mr Blair.
It began well for the Tories, defeating Labour in Putney, but a good night in London was not matched elsewhere in the country. Edgbaston was the party's most winnable seat in Birmingham, but it was Labour who were left smiling both in the Midlands and in much of the north. Charles Kennedy ended the night well pleased by his party's performance, especially the gains made at Labour's expense.
And I think that the era of three-party politics right across the United Kingdom is now with us. That is something that I welcome. I think it is a healthy development.
But not in the way he'd intended. The Liberal Democrats had wanted to defeat leading Tories, but the decapitation strategy largely failed. David Davis holding his seat and only one member of the Conservatives' top team being ousted. Instead, the party's big gains were against Labour. In seats like Newbury, voters returned to the Tories, perhaps a sign that they now perceive the Liberal Democrats as being to the left of Labour. If so, that will alarm party strategists. Whilst the SNP made gains in Scotland, it was a disappointing night for Plaid Cymru, which lost a seat and failed to win its top target. Wales also saw the Tories win seats for the first time since 1997. For Labour, the sourest moment came towards the end of the night. The anti-war MP George Galloway narrowly won Bethnal Green after a bitter, ill-tempered campaign. His presence in the new Parliament will be a daily reminder to Tony Blair of the electoral price his party seems to have paid over Iraq. Sean Lay, BBC News.
Well, our political correspondent James Landale is at Downing Street for us this morning. Good morning to you, James. And the Prime Minister we saw going in there about half an hour ago, presumably getting some sleep, having reflected on winning an historic third term.
Yeah, that's right. It's time for a bit of sleep. He's been up all night and has, as you say, came into Downing Street fairly straightforwardly, as he normally does, to about half an hour ago, I suppose, stood on the doorstep and waved and goes inside. He'll have a few hours sleep. Then later on this morning, about mid-morning, he'll probably go and see the Queen to formally ask permission to form a government, it's known as kissing hands, and after that he'll come back and start forming that government and thinking about his reshuffle.
James, one couldn't help reflecting on the difference between this time and 1997, when the Prime Minister arrived at the door of Number 10.
Absolutely. I mean, I was here and I remember it was a sort of one of those occasions when there was a crowd, mass fever, everybody waving and cheering, flags. You couldn't move, there were so many people here. There were just sort of party workers just coming up to kissing everyone, kissing the camera crews, kissing the photographers. It was a sort of mad occasion, a sort of Saturnalia, if you like. None of that today. None of that at all, just straightforward, business-like, a brief wave for the cameras and then in. And so the mood, the tone that Downing Street want to put across here is business as usual. It's a very difficult line they've got here between, on the one hand, saying, look, you know, this is an historic event. This is a third Labour term. This has not happened before. And they want to celebrate and mark that and acknowledge that. But on the other hand, they also want to say, look, we acknowledge that, you know, our majority has been cut. The British people have sent a very clear message. The Prime Minister said in his speech just now that he had been given a mandate, but Charles Clarke, who we assume will shortly be the Home Secretary again, said, well, it's an endorsement, but not a ringing endorsement. So they have to get that message as well. And that's why all the ministers are saying, look, let's listen, let's learn.
OK, James, for the time being, thanks a lot.
Well, Jonathan Beale is at the Conservative Party headquarters in central London for us this morning. Good morning to you, Jonathan. And how will the Conservatives be spinning this morning's results?
Well, I think some satisfaction. They've clearly made inroads. They've made inroads here in London, they've got seats in Wales, but they haven't made the progress they clearly wanted to make. And I think the problem for the Conservatives still is that they're on that 33% about share of the vote, which isn't going to be enough, clearly, to bring them back to power. But in Michael Howard's word, he believes he has made real progress. He's proud of the campaign, and he'll address his troops, and I think there'll be broad satisfaction.
Jonathan, thank you very much. We'll be back to you when we've sorted out the sound a little bit there. Thank you.
Yeah, one or two problems with the sound, but Branwen Jeffries is following events at the Liberal Democrat headquarters at Cowley Street in central London. She joins us now. Good morning to you, Branwen. Well, what's the mood there then? We heard Charles Kennedy saying he was very, very pleased that this is genuinely the beginning of an era of three-party politics.
A fairly cheerful mood. They're celebrating the largest number of MPs they've had since the 1920s, a very respectable increase in their share of the vote, although of course that translates into a relatively modest gain in terms of number of seats. But they did see some quite spectacular gains from the Labour Party, big swings in areas where there's a very large student representation in cities like Leeds and Cardiff and Cambridge, and perhaps the largest of all, in Manchester Withington, where a safe Labour seat with a majority of more than 11,000 at the last election went to the Liberal Democrats. So some room for satisfaction, but perhaps some concern they made so little impact on the Conservatives. They only managed to unseat one of their top Tory targets. That was Tim Collins, who was the shadow education spokesman for the Conservatives in the last Parliament.
And Branwen, you mentioned there the increase in share of the vote, but of course over 20% of the vote, less than 10% of the seats. Are there mutterings there again about the iniquities of our electoral system, the first past the post system?
Well, from the moment the exit polls came through to the Liberal Democrat Party last night, and it was clear that although their share had held up, that might not give them the number of seats that perhaps they'd privately hoped for. Senior party members were saying, well, look, if we had proportional representation, look how much better we would have done. We are getting a substantial number of votes, a real shift from people towards us, a definite choice of the Liberal Democrats, and that's not translating it into a fair number of seats.
OK, Branwen Jeffries, thank you very much.
Tony Blair has admitted that Iraq has been a decisive issue in the campaign so far, but has called on people to unite to look to the future.
Well, Breakfast's Graham Satchell has been assessing how big a part the war in Iraq may have played in the election result.
Mr. Blair, this is for Iraq.
George Galloway in Bethnal Green. This was the most ugly battle of the election campaign. Sitting MP Una King lost a massive 10,000 majority. The decisive issue, the war in Iraq.
All the lies you told have come back to haunt you.
Don't attack Iraq! 2 years ago, more than 1 million people marched against the war, the biggest protest this country has ever seen. But what impact has the war really had on the election? Well, throughout the campaign, the Labour strategy seemed to be don't mention the war. Some chance.
We were so happy that you got in. And now all our family's trust in the party is completely gone.
Tony, can we trust you now, can we? Regarding the, Iraq war?
Well, you're going to have to make up your mind about that. It's impossible not to draw the conclusion, listening to what's happening now, that the war and the Prime Minister have not caused a serious hemorrhage in Labour votes.
For the Conservatives who supported the war, Iraq became an opportunity to broaden their attack on the Prime Minister. They called him a liar.
Character is an issue at this election. It is about trust. Thank you very much.
If you look at the polling evidence, it looks as though there were still plenty of people who voted Labour who weren't sure that we'd done the right thing about Iraq. But the people who really weren't prepared to vote Labour were those who said they no longer trusted Tony Blair. So in the end, that debate about Tony Blair's integrity, which blew up during the campaign, probably was quite vital and probably did some damage to Labour's prospects.
So why didn't the Liberal Democrats do better? They were the only main party to oppose the war. Well, it seems in the end, although the war was important for voters, it may not have been enough for them to turn their backs entirely on Tony Blair. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
And we're going to be speaking to Alan Milburn, Labour's election coordinator, before 7:30. Stay tuned for that.
And we're going to have a quick look at the papers now, the early editions of them, of course, all reflecting that election result. There's the Independent, election 2005. You have to turn over to the back page to get it all. Britain goes to the polls, and the pictures of the party leaders. Michael Howard on the fold, actually.
Yeah, many of the newspapers hedging their bets, obviously, by the time they went to press last night. All the results still to be declared. Labour edges towards victory, though, is the Guardian's front page this morning, commenting on the fact that the exit polls were neck and neck, with the majority likely to plunge. Of course, that's proved correct now, and almost 1 in 5 vote tactically.
And our two main red-top tabloids, of course, they split in terms of they both wanted us to vote for the Labour Party, but Labour wins a historic third time on Blair's birthday, is the way the Daily Mirror tells it. But the Sun interprets it as a kick in the ballots. Blair set for victory, but majority slashed.
The other end of the spectrum, the Mail this morning, the election special that they have, Labour majority may be slashed to 66, says an exit poll. Quite accurate that was. And angry voters give Blair a shock. And the Express this morning as well, now make our lives better, hedging their bets, with both party leaders making their front page when they went to press. After 8 wasted years, a chance to start afresh.
And the Daily Mail election special. Oh, did you? Have we got two versions
Are
of
you
them?
not listening to me?
I'm reading the Daily Telegraph, actually, because there's a lovely family portrait on the front there of the Prime Minister going off to vote there with his wife and 2 of his 3 boys. Prime Minister heads for a historic hat trick.
And just to make you have a full set there, the Times this morning, Blair returns to number 10, but Iraq takes its toll.
It is 7:15. Let's recap the main news this morning. Tony Blair has won an historic 3rd successive election, but with a much reduced majority.
With most of the seats declared now, the latest prediction is a majority of 64. Now, this is a state of the parties a short while ago. Labour, 352, having lost 47 seats. The Conservatives, 195, gaining 33. The Liberal Democrats, 59, which up 11. Scottish National Party, up 2 to 6. Plaid Cymru, down 1 to 3, and 3 seats went to other parties.
Well, Labour's share of the vote was the lowest ever for a winning party. The Prime Minister said the victory was an extraordinary achievement, and he promised to build on those successes. He said he would respond to what the British people wanted sensibly and wisely and responsibly.
Well, the Conservative leader, Michael Howard, said that the time had now come for, quote, action and not talk from Mr Blair. He called on the Labour leader to, quote, again, deliver on the things that really matter to the people of our country.
And the Liberal Democrats achieved their best result for more than 80 years. Their leader, Charles Kennedy, said Britain no longer had a 2-party political system.
Still to come here on Breakfast this morning, no election would be complete without Peter Snow.
It's a substantially differently shaped House of Commons than one it used to be. It's been a very complicated election. Changes, very interesting ones for all the parties. I'll be describing them.
And here in Eastbourne at Bill's Cafe, we've got our own piping hot analysis of last night's results. It's the election platter. Now look here, you see, some candidates last night, they'll have been left with egg on their faces. Some will be taking home the bacon. Some will feel a bit like has-beens this morning. And others, well, they're just toast. See you later.
At least he's getting some breakfast. Carol's working hard out there, nothing for her. What's the weather looking like,
Morning.
Carol?
Good morning. It's sunshine and showers today, Dermot, with some rain later. And really, that's the forecast for this weekend as well. Sunshine and showers and a cold wind. And then as the weather settles down in the early part of next week, once again, we'll have that risk of frost. Now, this morning, the most prolific showers are in the north and the west of Scotland. But we have some around about Cheshire, for example, crossing the Pennines and in some parts of eastern England. Some of us this morning, too, getting off with a beautiful start to the day with some blue skies, but there is cloud around, and the lowest, thickest cloud, if you like, is in the southwest, and that's producing some drizzle. Now, through the afternoon, what you'll find is the cloud will thicken up in Northern Ireland. We'll see some rain, which will turn heavier by the time we get to the evening. But for the rest of us during the afternoon, again, we're looking at sunshine and showers, sunshine hazy at times, and sometimes it will just be bright rather than sunny anyway. Quite windy today, knocking the edge off the temperatures, which at best will be about 16 degrees Celsius, 61 Fahrenheit, down in the south. Then through this evening, if we pick up the rain in Northern Ireland once again, it's going to steadily cross England and Wales as we go through the course of the night, clearing the far southeast during the course of tomorrow morning. It could be heavy, especially around East Anglia, and it will be quite windy overnight as well, maybe even touching gale force along the coasts of England and Wales. In the south, as a result, not a cold night, but in the highlands, in the glens, temperatures could dip down as low as 1 degree Celsius. So here we could well just see a touch of frost. Then for tomorrow, once again, we're looking at sunshine and showers, some of the showers heavy, but some nice sunshine if you live in the southwest of England and Wales especially. And temperatures around about 16 degrees Celsius again, that's about 61 Fahrenheit. For Sunday too, we have that conglomeration, if you like, of sunshine and showers, the best in the southwest once again, and temperatures very similar. And as I mentioned at the top, it is going to be windy and a chilly wind through this weekend. That's it. Back to you two.
Carol, thank you very much. Well, if you're just waking up, tuning into breakfast, Tony Blair is back in number 10, the first Labour leader in history to be elected for a third term.
To remind us how he got there, here's Peter Snow, the king of the swingometer.
Well, here we have it. It's a Labour victory, all right, but it's less of a one than last time. I'm now going to show you that the map is colouring up, flashing the gains here. More blue than it was last time, more gold than it was last time for Liberal Democrat. Start in London. You can see a substantial number of Tory gains there. And George Galloway, by the way, coming and taking Bethnal Green as an independent, that grey one in the middle of town there. And as you go up the map, so you see a lot of these Tory gains going out into the countryside here. The Tories with about 31 net gains altogether, and the Liberal Democrats a dozen or so. The Tories even back in Scotland, in Dumfriesshire here, flashing away there. And the swing all over the country, an average swing of 3% to the Tories. They did better in the marginals. That's why they're doing rather better than that swing would suggest. Now, the crucial story in this election has been that Mr. Blair had 80 seats in the old House of Commons that comprised his majority. He had to hold on to enough of these seats, each of them with little figures on there, as you can see, mainly in the Midlands, the North and the South East there in clusters around the conurbations. He had to hold on enough of these seats to retain his majority. And here they go. I'm going to put them up now on Blair's battleground. We've numbered them from 1 to 80. Top left is the most marginal, bottom right are the least marginal. So the safest ones for Mr. Blair are over that side, the unsafest ones up over here, the easiest ones for the Tories and Liberal Democrats to turn blue and gold here. Let's see what's actually happened then in Blair's battleground. There you are, a lot of successes for the Tories and Liberal Democrats in the first 2 or 3 columns, but by the time you get down here, apart from a few parachutists up here like Gravesham, on the whole, the Labour Party is surviving. Let's just bunch them together now and you'll see exactly how many gains we can reckon the Tories will end up with. 31 net gains, the Tories, a couple of independents here winning, most unusual election, a couple of Scottish National Party. Otherwise, the Labour Party holding on in just under half of these vital seats that they really had to hold on to retain their majority. So, there it is, a majority for Tony Blair of 66 forecast on a share of the vote that looks like this. Here we have the share of the vote all over the country, 36% Labour, just 3% ahead of the Tories. The Liberal Democrats on 23, and there are the others there on 8%. Now, that share of the vote, if that's what it ends up as, looks as if it will, that share of the vote will be the lowest winning party's share of the vote in British electoral history.
Peter Snow there. Well, at Westminster now is Labour's election coordinator, Alan Milburn. A very good morning to you, Mr Milburn. Now, first of all, we understand you've asked the Prime Minister not to consider you for a cabinet post. Is that because it's been such a bruising experience at the heart of this campaign?
No, it isn't that at all. When I came back into the government in September of last year, I made it pretty clear then that I would work with Tony and with Gordon and John Prescott and Ian McCartney and try to deliver this Labour victory. But for me, it was always a temporary rather than a permanent appointment. I've got a young family, people know that, and pretty simply, I just want to see a bit more of my kids growing up. OK, so back to the backbenches. But thinking about what Labour has to do in the third term, the Prime Minister has said you have to listen and respond. How exactly? Well, I think Tony knows what people want of him, and one of the great things about an election campaign is that you get out there and you listen to people, and people have made it pretty loud and clear. They want the government, quite rightly, focused on their priorities. And I think the reason that we've got a Labour government today and not a Conservative government is that they decided that their priorities, which is the economy, interest rates, inflation, jobs, the public services, hospitals and schools, and so on, these should be the focus of all of our attention, and they will be.
Can't ignore Iraq, though. They were telling you they don't like that, wasn't they?
Yes, and Iraq was an issue, quite evidently. It's a big issue, and rightly so. If you go to war, of course it's bound to be a big issue, but I think in the end, most people voted on bread and butter issues about the economy and public services, and that's why they've re-elected a Labour government and given us a large majority. This is the first time that we've been re-elected for the third time. It is a tremendous achievement on Tony Blair's part. I think vindication of his leadership, of the government he's been leading, of the campaign that we have run, and I think people will begin to ask, as the final results came in, why, if the circumstances were so propitious for the Conservative Party, why is it that they failed to achieve any lift-off from their 33% that they achieved in 2001, and they're still stuck on 33% in 2005? Why? Because they haven't changed.
Just on that issue of leadership, there was a question being asked by the electorate there as well, wasn't there? Because during the campaign we saw Mr Blair and Mr Brown going around many meetings and press conferences together. Weren't the electorate saying, and even Labour voters saying, we don't really want you, Mr Blair, we want Gordon Brown?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. And indeed, every time there was a poll during the general election campaign comparing Tony with the other two leaders, Tony won it, and indeed his poll rating strengthened, and he got a fantastic reception in the country, and rightly so. Nobody has done what Tony Blair has done for the Labour Party, which is to deliver this third historic term. And nobody has delivered the sort of economic stability and strength that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown have managed to deliver together.
Now, in terms of the size of the majority, the predictions are it's going to be about 64 seats. You're not used to operating with, I mean, still a sizable majority, of course,
Sure.
but you're not used to operating with something below three figures. Does this, in a way, empower the so-called awkward squad, the usual suspects that have made difficulties for you in the past but haven't really been able to have an effect?
Well, in an odd sort of way, I actually think it will concentrate the mind, a smaller majority. And of course, we've got a manifesto that everybody signed up to, everybody fought the election on. It is a new Labour manifesto. It is all about making sure that we have a strong economy, a fair society, and reformed public services. And that reform agenda is what we want to take forward. And the great thing about a third term, I suppose, is that you've got the foundations of economic stability in place. We've got the investment and the changes going into the public services. And now what we can do is accelerate the changes precisely in order to fulfil our mandate. And that is to, I suppose in simplest terms, make life better for hard-working families and pensioners in this country. That's what politics for me is all about.
OK, Alan Milburn, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on
Pleasure.
The time 7:26, you're watching Breakfast, and just to let you know, you can find out more about the election results from our interactive television service. If you're watching digitally, you can press red to access our multi-screen.
And access all the results. They're all on our website as well at bbc.co.uk/election 2005, that's all one word, or on CFAX page 700.
We're back shortly. In the next hour, more analysis of last night's results, and our very own Bill Turnbull is in Eastbourne, where he's going to be getting the views from one man and one woman on the street.
And now we join our news teams across the UK.
Good morning from BBC London News. I'm Assad Ahmed. It's been a bad night for Labour in the capital. Take a look at the new political map. There's been a swing of nearly 5% from Labour to the Conservatives. And in the past half hour, Labour have lost Croydon Central to the Tories by 75 votes. That result came after 3 recounts. But Labour also lost a key safe seat in Bethnal Green and Bow. Una King narrowly lost what was a 10,000 majority to the Respect Party candidate George Galloway. The result followed a tense and vitriolic election campaign in the East London seat, which has a large number of Muslim voters. There were some significant Conservative gains in London, largely at Labour's expense. The Conservatives' first win of the evening was Putney with Justine Greening. Another Tory gain was Enfield Southgate, where former London Schools Minister Stephen Twigg was toppled with a swing of 8.7%. And there were Tory gains in Ilford North, Wimbledon, Hammersmith, Bexley Heath, Hemel Hempstead, Guildford, Hornchurch and St Albans. And the first ever black Tory MP, Adam Afri, managed to hold Windsor for the Tories. Well, Lib Dem London Assembly member Lynn Featherstone beat off Labour's Barbara Roach in Hornsey and Wood Green, and Sarah Tether held on to her Brent East constituency that she won from Labour in a by-election in 2003. And a number of minor parties have seen their votes go up. In Barking in Essex, the British National Party polled 17% of the vote, their highest in the UK. Well, that's the election roundup for now. Now let's get a look at the travel news with Kate Allen. Hello there, Kate.
Hello, Assad. Well, if you are heading out and about this morning, not looking too bad for the tubes, but we have got a problem now for the overground trains. Southeastern services are currently disrupted. Delays of approximately 20 minutes after a road vehicle hit a bridge out at Rochester. No trains are passing through Rochester at the moment, and some trains are being diverted via Dartford as well, so do check before travelling. Now, we've got a couple of accidents to watch out for as well. Firstly, on the M40, northbound between junctions 3 and 4, that's Loudwater up to High Wycombe at Handy Cross. We've got a lane block there due to an accident. And also over in Shepherd's Bush, the A219 Wood Green, near the junction of South Africa Road. Traffic looking busy there, southbound due to a crash. Now, behind me is the picture of the A40, or the approach road to the A40 at Wells Farm Road. We've got one lane closed there due to roadworks, already looking very heavy heading towards London from the Hanger Lane underpass. And the North Circular, very heavy on the westbound carriageway up through Palmer's Green towards the Clock House interchange. That's it from me. Assad.
Kate, thanks very much. Well, look at the weather forecast now, and this will be mainly dry with some sunny intervals, turning cloudy later. The top temperature will reach 16 degrees Celsius. Well, we've got a team of election experts on hand to answer your questions on the BBC London Election Special programme from 9 o'clock this morning with Emily Maitlis. Send your questions to our usual address. It's on your screen now, yourlondon@bbc.co.uk. We look forward to getting those a little bit later. We're back in half an hour. Back to Dermot and Natasha.
Hello, this is Breakfast with Natasha, Kaplinsky and Dermot Murnaghan.
Our main news this morning, Tony Blair has won an historic third successive election, but with a much reduced majority.
With most of the seats declared, the latest prediction is a Labour majority of 64. And this is the state of the parties a short while ago. Labour are on 353 seats, having lost 47. The Conservatives, 195. They've gained 33. The Lib Dems are up 11 on 59. And Plaid Cymru down 1 to 3. The Scottish National Party gained 2 seats to increase their number to 6, and 3 seats went to independent candidates or other parties.
So if we translate that into a share of the overall vote, Labour took 36.4%. That's down 5.8% on the last time. Now, it's also the lowest ever share of the vote for a winning party. The Conservatives were up 0.6% on 33.1, while the Liberal Democrats took 22.6% of the overall vote, up 3.9.
Well, the Prime Minister said the British people wanted a return of a Labour government, but with a reduced majority, and he promised to respond to that sensibly and wisely and responsibly. Now, the Conservatives said the public had wanted to cut Tony Blair down to size and make him more accountable. And the Lib Dems said they were now the only truly national party and were becoming the real challengers to Labour.
We're going to be hearing from all the main parties this morning here on Breakfast, but first, our political correspondent Sean Lay now has the story of the night.
Tony Blair returned to London this morning after securing a third successive term as Prime Minister, a record equalled only by Margaret Thatcher. The pro-hunting campaigner Otis Ferry briefly spoiled the victory celebration before being bundled away by Mr Blair's entourage. Anger over a variety of issues may explain the other side to Labour's win, that it's been achieved with the smallest share of the vote ever won by a government. Still, Mr Blair told party workers they should be well pleased with the result.
We've got a mandate to govern this country again. Yes, there are good comrades that have fallen, but there are also extraordinary results that have come through tonight. And we've got to listen to the people and respond wisely and sensibly. But they have made it very clear. They wanted to carry on with Labour and not go back to the Tory years.
One possible explanation for his smaller majority, Iraq. Earlier at his own count in Sedgefield, Mr Blair listened as Reg Keyes, who stood against him in protest at the death of his son in the war, delivered a blunt message.
I hope in my heart that one day the Prime Minister may be able to say sorry. That one day he will say sorry to the families of the bereaved.
8 years ago, it was Stephen Twiggs' unexpected victory against Michael Portillo which summed up the Labour landslide. His defeat this time illustrated the bigger-than-expected swing back to the Tories in London.
And I do hereby declare Chaps Grant V, the Conservative Party candidate, 22,100.
Other Labour ministers suffered a similar fate. Although Michael Howard has led the Conservatives to their third successive election defeat, he thinks his party's performance vindicates his leadership.
What has happened on this election day marks a significant step towards our recovery. I am proud of the campaign that we have fought. We have taken a stand on the things that really do matter to the people of our country. We have sent a message to Mr. Blair.
It began well for the Tories, defeating Labour in Putney, but a good night in London was not matched elsewhere in the country. Edgbaston was the party's most winnable seat in Birmingham, but it was Labour who were left smiling both in the Midlands and in much of the north. Charles Kennedy ended the night well pleased by his party's performance, especially the gains made at Labour's expense.
And I think that the era of three-party politics right across the United Kingdom is now with us. That is something that I welcome. I think it is a healthy development.
But not in the way he'd intended. The Liberal Democrats had wanted to defeat leading Tories, but the decapitation strategy largely failed. David Davis holding his seat and only one member of the Conservatives' top team being ousted. Instead, the party's big gains were against Labour. In seats like Newbury, voters returned to the Tories, perhaps a sign that they now perceive the Liberal Democrats as being to the left of Labour. If so, that will alarm party strategists. Whilst the SNP made gains in Scotland, it was a disappointing night for Plaid Cymru, which lost a seat and failed to win its top target. Wales also saw the Tories win seats for the first time since 1997. For Labour, the sourest moment came towards the end of the night. The anti-war MP George Galloway narrowly won Bethnal Green after a bitter, ill-tempered campaign. His presence in the new Parliament will be a daily reminder to Tony Blair of the electoral price his party seems to have paid over Iraq. Sean Lay, BBC News.
Well, our political correspondent James Landale is in Downing Street this morning. Let's talk to him. Good morning to you, James. A jubilant Prime Minister, as we just saw there in Sean's report, but a rather subdued arrival back in Downing Street this morning, it has to be said.
Yeah, that's right. I think that the mood here is one of, OK, we've won an historic victory, and it is an extraordinary historic victory, but at the same time, you know, the British people have sent a very clear message to the Labour Party and to the Prime Minister. Their majority is substantially down. It's now, we expect to be in the late 60s, and that means that the Prime Minister's tone and mood, I think, this morning will be very much business as usual. He'll get a few hours skip, go and see the Queen, formally get her permission to form the government and get on with forming that government.
And what can we expect from the Prime Minister for the rest of the day then, James?
Well, I think what we're going to get is lots of private meetings going on in there with him and one or two very close advisors poring over long lists saying, right, well, if we put this chap in here, can we put that lady in here? And working out precisely the shape of the government. They always start with the cabinet. I think he'll have a broad idea of what he wants to do. I'm told that initially they're talking of a fairly modest changes. We know there are some slots already to fill. For example, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Paul Boateng, has already announced that he's going off to be our ambassador to South Africa. So that's one slot that's spare, so that might bring in some new blood, possibly somebody like David Miliband, who originally began life as a sort of advisor to the Prime Minister on policy here in Number 10. But there are lots of other changes being mooted, but they will be worked on later on this morning.
James, thank you.
Well, as we've been hearing, Charles Kennedy has hailed the election as the birth of a new era of three-party politics. Well, the Liberal Democrat President, Simon Hughes, is at Westminster. Very good morning to you, Mr. Hughes. Now, how do you interpret it from the Lib Dems' point of view? Is it a very good night or a missed opportunity to have done even better?
Well, unless you win and become the government, you also want to have done better. So, no, we didn't become the government, and that's frustrating. But I guess we thought we'd have to get there by stages. We've had an increase in the share of the vote much more significant than the Conservatives have. We've done that twice in a row now, again better than the Conservatives. We've had our largest increase in the number of members of Parliament, with one exception, for 80 years, and we have the largest parliamentary party in your lifetime, my lifetime, and the lifetime of pretty nearly everybody watching, I guess. So we established ourselves in the last Parliament as the effective opposition. I think that was widely reported, accepted by independent commentators. We've won seats from Labour, the Conservatives and the Nationalists. We intend now to be that even more effective opposition, and I still believe that we can become the next non-Labour government. It would have been nice to be this time, but it may have to wait a year.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked the question, you might have done better. I mean, in seat after seat, you seem to be coming second after very good performances, but second to Labour. But in those seats where you were taking on the Conservatives, by and large, especially with the decapitation strategy of the high command of the Tories, you didn't do it.
Well, let's deal with both parts of that. It wasn't us, of course, who called it a decapitation strategy, but we did have some seats which the Tories had held where we were fairly close behind. There were 5 with well-known figures in them. We won one, Tim Collins' seat up in the Lake District with my good friend Tim Farron, and that was a huge success. I don't think it's been a Liberal seat for 99 years or more. So we've made some progress against the Conservatives. It's always more difficult against another opposition party. But yes, it was more difficult to shift their votes.
Yeah, I mean, Oliver Letwin, David Davis, Theresa May, they're all still there.
No, I concede. There were 5 which potentially we could have won. We won 1 out of those 5. We won 11 seats from Labour, 1 from the Nationalists. Huge falls in the Labour vote. What I haven't seen, and none of us have worked out, is how far we've moved into second places in all those seats. But my guess is we've moved up a long way to be in really effective position to challenge in many of them in the future. The really interesting thing is we've won in Scotland, Wales and England. We've won from Tories, Labour and Nationalists. And we have won with many more women members of Parliament to have a parliamentary team that is definitely being able to be much more effective. Question, what will the effect be in Parliament? Answer, I hope, tuition and top-up fees, which got through by a majority of 4, wouldn't be able to get through again. Some of the anti-terrorism legislation that took away liberties when there weren't quite enough of us on the opposition benches, that will get through. So we'll be able to change policy. There will be coalitions of the enlightened, and Labour will not get their own way, and nor should they, because only a quarter of the British public have voted for them, even though the funny electoral system has thrown out an even stranger outcome.
OK, Simon Hughes, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
In Scotland, Labour remains by far the biggest party, but it did lose 5 seats.
The Tories lost their only sitting MP north of the border, but took the Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweedale seats. The Scottish National Party and the Liberal Democrats picked up a couple of extra seats as well. Here's Andrew Castle with the story from Scotland.
Bringing in the vote from the islands of the Outer Hebrides. And with the helicopters, a major upset and a shock for Labour. Na Helena na Nier, formerly the Western Isles, went to the SNP's Angus MacNeil, ousting Labour's Callum MacDonald, who'd held the seat for 18 years. Victory in Dundee East, also at the expense of Labour, helped the Nationalists secure 6 Westminster seats.
I'm looking forward now with some confidence, you might expect, to fighting these 2 government parties, the Liberal Party and the Labour Party, in the Scottish elections in 2 years' time.
The Lib Dems also benefited from a protest vote against Labour. They seized East Dunbartonshire and Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey, putting them in second place in Scotland on share of the vote. Despite the reverses, Labour remain the dominant political force north of the border. Transport and Scottish Secretary Alistair Darling, said to be vulnerable, held his Edinburgh seat to the relief of his party.
It is an amazing moment in history that Labour government wins a 3rd term. It's something that most of us could never have dreamed of in the 1980s and the 1990s. It's a fantastic achievement.
It threatened to be a calamitous night for the Tories when they lost their only Scottish MP, Peter Duncan, but within the hour they snatched Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweedale. Still no sign, however, of a Conservative recovery in Scotland. Andrew Castle, BBC News.
That's the scene in Scotland. Wales remains a largely Labour landscape today, of course, but after 8 years in the wilderness, the Conservatives have gained 3 Westminster seats. The Lib Dems will be pretty happy as well, but it wasn't a good night for the Nationalist Party Plaid Cymru.
Our correspondent Wira Davis is outside the National Assembly in Cardiff for us, and talk us through the highs and lows of the night, will you, Wira?
Well, it was a very long night, Natasha, as you well know, but one man who's feeling pretty good about himself this morning is Peter Law. Peter Law is a Welsh Assembly member. He's now also an MP. He stood as an independent. He called himself independent socialist. He overtook Labour's biggest majority in Wales, Blaen y Gwent, the seat of Michael Foot in the past, the seat of Aneurin Bevan. He wiped out a 19,000 majority. That is a massive majority, a big blow for Labour. Elsewhere, Labour lost to the Tories. They used to say Wales was a Tory-free zone. There are now 3 Conservative MPs from Wales, one in the south, one in the north, one in the west. Also, the Lib Dems, they did pretty well. They increased their share of the vote, share of seats from 2 to 4, taking 1 from Plaid Cymru. The big losers, though, in Wales were Plaid Cymru. They started the night with 4 seats. They had big hopes of getting 5. They're actually down to 3. And I think tonight, last night's vote actually poses big leadership issues for Plaid Cymru.
Peter Law, the story of the morning, really, from where you are. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, it's a bizarre story because what Labour have done in Wales in an effort to get more women MPs into politics, into Westminster and into the Assembly, they have these all-women shortlists. Men basically aren't allowed to contest the seat for Labour. That has angered many Welsh traditionalists, many aspirational men in the Labour Party in Wales. Peter Law was one of them. He stood on a ticket of being anti this all-women shortlist. Some people called him old-fashioned, some people even called him misogynistic. Nonetheless, his policy, his stance got him support, and he now has overturned that 19,000 majority, and he has his own 10,000 majority. So perhaps Labour might have to rethink this policy in other seats now in Wales.
OK, Weir Davis from Cardiff, thank you very much.
7:43, if you've just joined us, the main news this morning is a historic 3rd successive election win for Tony Blair. But he's won with a reduced majority, with most of the seats declared. The latest prediction is a majority of 66 seats.
Labour's share of the vote was the lowest ever for a winning party. The Prime Minister said that the victory was, quote, an extraordinary achievement, and he promised to build on those successes. He said he would respond to what the British people wanted, sensibly, wisely and responsibly.
The Conservative leader, Michael Howard, said the time had now come for action and not talk from Mr Blair. He called on the Labour leader to deliver on the things that really matter to the people of our country.
And the Liberal Democrat leader, they achieved their best result for more than 80 years. Their leader, Charles Kennedy, saying that Britain no longer had a 2-party political system.
Time out from politics now. Let's get the weather. Here's Carol. Good morning.
Carol.
Good morning. It's a chilly start to the day here in the wind, but if you're out of the wind, it's not looking too bad at all. In fact, the forecast for today and this coming weekend is sunshine and showers, and we'll have this cool wind, and at times it will be very windy, especially so in exposed parts of Scotland. Then as we head on into the new week, well, it looks like things are going to settle down quite nicely. Now this morning you can see a good rash of showers affecting parts of Scotland, also in around Cheshire and over to the east of England too. These showers will continue, but they're always going to be heaviest in the north and west of Scotland. Elsewhere we've got some sunshine to start the day, or some cloud, but low cloud affecting the southwest of England, producing some drizzle at the moment, will spread into Northern Ireland through the course of the afternoon, producing some rain, and that rain's likely to be quite heavy by the time we get to evening. Elsewhere, a pleasant afternoon if you're in the sunshine. If you're in the wind or the showers, it will feel that wee bit cooler. But our top temperature is 16 degrees Celsius, which is 61 Fahrenheit. Again, tempered by the wind. That's it. Back to Natasha and Dermot.
Thanks, Carol. Now, we've heard plenty from the politicians this morning, but what do the people who cast their votes make of the result?
Well, that's right. Bill Turnbull is getting some food for thought at, where else? Bill's Cafe in Eastbourne. Morning, Bill.
Stylish, don't you think? This little sideline of mine, this nice little gaff I've got down here in Eastbourne. It's a lovely sunny day. Is this the bright new dawn, then, of a historic 3rd Labour term, or perhaps are clouds gathering as Tony Blair takes up the reins of power in Downing Street once again? Let's ask our experts here. Morning, Hamish. How are you today?
Very well.
Now, what do you think? Labour majority of in the 60s, does that spell trouble for Tony Blair in the next term, do you think?
I think it would do if the Conservatives and the Lib Democrats can get a charismatic leader to challenge him. He really won this because he was the only charismatic leader of the 3 of them.
So you think Conservatives need a new leader?
They certainly need. Michael Howard did well, but he's not the right age. They really do have to find somebody who is a charismatic and a good talker and really look for a younger man.
All right, you got anybody in mind?
Haven't seen one yet.
OK, Hamish, thank you very much. Of course, everybody gave their opinion at the ballot box. Let's find out what people's opinions are now about that opinion. Here's Russ. Morning, Russ.
Morning.
How are you doing? What did you think of the election result last night?
I think there was quite a reduced majority to what they had before.
Labour.
Yeah, and I think that will frighten them during the next election, next period of their reign.
Yeah. What did you think of the campaign overall?
I thought it was very poor.
Why?
Because I've lived in Eastbourne over 20 years, and this is the first time in a campaign I've never seen a candidate around.
That's interesting. OK, Russ, thank you very much. Now we've got a very dapper gentleman here, one of the regulars. Dave. Morning, Dave. How are you? You were unimpressed by the result last night, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
Why? You were disappointed by the result, or you weren't particularly excited by it?
No, I'm not excited about anything, really.
You've given up on politics altogether, have you? I wonder how many other people there are like that in Eastbourne. We're going to get the voice of the management now. Here's Steve. Morning, Steve. Lovely breakfast. Thank you very much indeed. What do you think about the result last night?
No, I think it was as expected. I expected Labour to get in again, but we'll see how they get on in the next 3 years. You know, we'll let the politicians do their job and I'll run my caff, like, you know.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. I'll let you get back in the kitchen because he's going to prepare for us our special Bill's Cafe election platter, which just lays it all out for you on a plate. See you later.
A bargain at $2.99. Thanks very much, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Now, Tony Blair has promised to focus on things that really matter to people when he returns to Downing Street. But he'll do so after an election in which almost 2 out of 3 voters supported parties other than Labour.
Yes, indeed. So what can we expect from Mr Blair's third term? Well, Matthew D'Ancona is the Deputy Editor of the Sunday Telegraph and Jude Kelly, Theatre Director and Labour supporter, is here as well. A very good morning to you both. Talking about Mr Blair's third term, Matthew D'Ancona, the big question is how long will it last for him?
Well, I mean, his authority is diminished, I suppose, by the fact that he has got such a substantially reduced majority. One has to remember that he's also achieved a historic third victory, so it's a slightly strange situation he finds himself in. I think he'll want to go on as long as he can, and I certainly think he'll want to fight the referendum on the EU constitution, which is set to go in 2006. So I'd imagine if he can possibly carry on, he will. But he will have to take more stock of the fact that Parliament is a stronger force now because his majority is much reduced, something he's just not used to.
I mean, Jude Kelly, do you think he can carry on? For the full third term, he says he wants to. As a Labour supporter, were you angry with the leadership, particularly over Iraq?
I think that it was a good thing that so much of the voting was able to demonstrate that there was a considerable anger about the lack of democracy around the whole business of Iraq. I think that's clear in the results. And yes, I was angry. I think that what is good about Labour getting in for a third term is that there's been so much about domestic policy that has really been terrific for this country. But I would like to think that this third term, the fact that they had a reduced majority meant that the House of Commons came back into its own. I think it's absolutely critical that people see that the Parliament itself has a big say in what happens, because otherwise young people, the next generation, are going to lose even more. Even less interest in politics.
But do you think they can do that? Do you think they can change their spots? I mean, having been characterised as the party, especially in the last term, that didn't listen to the people, especially about Iraq, can they change? Can Mr Blair change, become more consensual?
I think that the Cabinet as a whole will wish to be more consensual. I think in the last 10 years, quite surprisingly, that the chat around politics has become more and more narrow, more and more Westminster, more and more London-based, actually, and that's got to change as well. I think if we're really going to address, let's just talk about youth. All the way through this election campaign from all the parties, all I've heard about is how negatively we've looked at youth. There's things about disorder, discipline, crime on the streets, etc. Nobody's actually said what we're going to do is take the whole idea of young people, introduce a whole spread of young people's policies. We're going to talk to young people about how they're going to vote. You know, and I think that the next term is going to have to be about refocusing politics into remembering that democracy is important.
Well, Matthew D'Ancona, how do you read that? Does politics become interesting again because of this reduced majority?
Well, I think that what both Labour and the Conservatives will be desperate to do is to seize that opportunity. Labour will want to renew in office, and the obvious way they'll do that is by trying to hand over to Gordon Brown and signal that he is somehow a symbol of something new. The Tories, on the other hand, will say this result proves that the Labour Party is coming to the end of its era, and who knows, one might actually get a new, younger Conservative leader in the course of this Parliament who will carry that torch forward. So it's going to be very interesting, I think.
I mean, you mentioned Mr Brown. I mean, how long do you think he's prepared to wait? Because clearly, I mean, the ball's almost in his court, isn't he? I mean, he's seen here as having delivered the election for Labour, stepped in as Mr Blair's fire shield over Iraq. I mean, isn't it his for the asking now, the leadership?
It is, but he would want, if he does indeed become Labour leader, to win the next election with a substantial majority. And the difficulty is that if he poses as the great mutineer during the coming Parliament, the risk is that the following majority will be much reduced. So he's got a very delicate balance to play in the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting that's coming up, we've got another election on July the 6th. We've got the Olympic election, if you see what I mean. Yeah. If we win the Olympics, and I absolutely hope we do, that is going to be an amazing achievement, and it's an amazing goal for the whole country to aim for. If we don't win the Olympics, I think the nation still has to aim for something totally aspirational. We have to gather together...
Of course, it's not an election that any of us get to vote in.
No, but the point I was going to make is that it's to do with Gordon Brown and the fourth term, really, that the Labour Party have to decide that they're going to re-engage with aspiration. And that's something that Gordon Brown, I think, will want to do. And the trajectory towards the fourth term.
That's, of course, if there is going to be a fourth term. I mean, just a quick question to you, Matthew Duncan. I've been talking all about the Labour Party, the government, but what about the Tories? Have they done enough here now, do you think, to dream of victory next time round?
Well, the good news for the Tories is that Michael Howard is safe. And the other good piece of news for the Tories is they've managed to fend off the Lib Dem challenge, that none of the people, with the exception of Tim Collins, who were expected to go from Lib Dem challenges, did during the night. The bad news is that they're still relatively low in numbers of seats. And in order to win next time, they'd have to win in excess of 120 seats. So massive amounts of work
They have to groom someone for the leadership. They can't put Matthew, that's you, they can't put Michael Howard up again, can they?
I suppose not. But I think that Michael Howard would want to see, again, an orderly transition if he does yield the leadership in the course of this Parliament. And, you know, it's no secret that he favours David Cameron. There are other contenders around the place too. OK, well, Matthew Duncan and Jude Kelly, thank you both very much indeed for joining us on Breakfast.
Well, how is the city responding to this historic Labour third term? Sally Bundock is at the London Stock Exchange for more reaction. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Natasha. Before I tell you about the FTSE 100, which of course is due to open in about 10 minutes' time, let me tell you about a story that's been breaking in the last sort of 30 minutes. Marconi has announced that it's proposing 800 job cuts. This has disappointed unions who've been talking with Marconi for some time. This is part of its restructuring following losing a major contract with British Telecom. As far as the FTSE goes, many believe it's going to open fairly steady, little movement. The majority, of course, was lower than what was expected, but not low enough for the city to get concerned about the outlook here. But we'll tell you later how things go. Now, though, back to you.
Sally,
Thank you. In the next hour here on Breakfast, a full roundup of all the results, and we're going to be hearing from the anti-war candidate George Galloway, who won the Bethnal Green seat. We're also going to be speaking to the BBC's political editor, Andrew Marr.
Now we join our news teams across the UK. See you in a bit.
Good morning from BBC London News. I'm Asad Ahmed. It's been a bad night for Labour in London. Take a look at the new political map. There's been a swing of nearly 5% from Labour to the Conservatives, and in the past hour, Labour have lost Croydon Central to the Tories by 75 votes. That result came after 3 recounts. But Labour also lost a key safe seat in Bethnal Green and Bow. Una King narrowly lost what was a 10,000 majority to the Respect Party candidate George Galloway. The result followed a tense and vitriolic election campaign in the East London seat, which has a large number of Muslim voters. Speaking after his win, Mr Galloway launched a scathing attack on the Prime Minister.
Mr Blair, this is for Iraq. This defeat that you have suffered and all the other defeats that New Labour has suffered this evening is for Iraq. All the people you killed, all the lies you told have come back to haunt you. And the best thing the Labour Party could do is sack you tomorrow morning as soon as they get back to work.
George Galloway. Now, there were some significant Conservative gains in London too, largely at Labour's expense. The Conservatives' first win of the evening was in Putney with Justine Greening. Another Tory gain and Labour casualty was in Enfield Southgate, where former London Schools Minister Stephen Twigg was toppled with a swing of 8.7%. And there were Tory gains in Ilford North, Wimbledon, Hammersmith, Bexley Heath, Hemel Hempstead, Guildford, Hornchurch and St Albans. And the first ever black Tory MP, Adam Afriyie, managed to hold on to the Windsor seat. Well, Lib Dem London Assembly member Lynn Featherstone beat off Labour's Barbara Roach in Hornsey and Wood Green, and Sarah Tether held on to her Brent East constituency, which she won from Labour in the 2003 by-election. Well, a number of minor parties have seen their votes go up as well. In Barking and Essex, the British National Party polled 17% of the vote. And as we've seen, George Galloway's victory in Bethnal Green meant Respect averaged nearly 5% in the areas they stood for election. In West Ham in particular, nearly 1 in 5 voted for the party. Well, so far the final tally in London seats is 44 to Labour, 21 to the Conservatives and 8 to the Lib Dems. And that's the election roundup for now. Let's get the travel news with Kate Allen. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Assad. Well, if you are heading out and about this morning, not too bad for the underground. There's no reported problems. But for the overground trains, problems down in Rochester for southeastern services. After a road vehicle hit a bridge earlier, we've got delays of up to 20 minutes, and plus some trains are being diverted via Dartford. Now, taking a look at the roads this morning, we have got a couple of accidents to watch out for. Firstly, the M40 northbound, so heading away from London. Between junctions 3 and 4, that's Loudwater up towards High Wycombe. We've got one lane closed there due to a crash. And over in Shepherd's Bush, the A219 Wood Lane, we've got restrictions southbound around the junction with South Africa Road, and that's all due to a crash as well. Now, here's the picture of the A2 down in Deptford. Traffic not actually looking too bad. It is building up just a little bit near Deptford Bridge, heading in towards London. We have got another problem, though, on the A2, Deptford Broadway. Eastbound at Brook Mill Road, we've got a broken down vehicle there, and that's going to cause some delays heading in towards London as well. Now, moving on to if you're making your way towards central London, Tower Bridge, of course, closed in both directions. We're building up around Rotherhithe Tunnel, popular diversion route there, and also London Bridge, very heavy already, heading northbound up towards the city. Assad.
Thanks very much for that. That's the travel news. Now let's get the weather forecast with Susan Powell.
Good morning. Plenty of dry and fine weather to come for us today. There would also be some sunshine around at times, but it could just be a little bit hit and miss as we go on and off throughout the day. I think this morning will start bright and sunny, but we could see some cloud bubbling up as we head on into the afternoon. And by the end of the day, things actually could be looking quite grey. But thanks to an early start with the sunshine, temperatures today should get up to 16 or 17 at best. That's the low 60s Fahrenheit. It will, though, always feel a touch cooler than this, thanks to quite a brisk northwesterly breeze. We keep that breeze going on into the weekend, and it looks like through Saturday and Sunday, the wind could even carry in a scattering of showers from time to time. So a little bit of a mixed outlook for the next few days, but at least today looks like it will be fine and settled. This weekend also promises some good sunny spells for most of us, but just watch out for that risk of 1 or 2 showers.
Now, just before we go, time to remind you that we've got a team of election experts on hand to answer your questions on the BBC London Election Special Programme from 9 o'clock this morning with Emily Maitlis. Send your questions to our usual address. It's on your screen now, yourlondon@bbc.co.uk. We look forward to getting those emails. That's it for now. Kate and I are back in half an hour. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
I just told the guys, and I said, you know, you guys just follow me, and whatever I said, you said.
It was terrific. People loved it, and the way it built, and then the way they pretended to stop in the middle. This was wild.
From Ray Charles to Mary J. Blige, a new 6-part series tells the definitive history of soul. Soul Deep, Saturday at 8:25 on BBC Two.
Hello, very good morning to you. You're watching Breakfast with Dermot Murnaghan and Natasha Kaplinsky.
Thank you. Tony Blair wins an historic third term as Prime Minister, but Labour's majority is slashed.
That's our main story here on Breakfast. It's Friday, May the 6th.
Good morning, thanks for joining us. Also on today's programme, Tony Blair admits he'll have to listen to the message from the voters.
We've got to listen to the people and respond wisely and sensibly. But they have made it very clear. They wanted to carry on with Labour and not go back to the Tory years.
Gains for the Conservatives. Michael Howard admits defeat but insists the result is a turning point.
Gains for the Liberal Democrats as well. Charles Kennedy declares it's the birth of an era of three-party politics.
And before 8:30 this morning, the Iraq effect. We're going to be speaking to George Galloway, who took Bethnal Green from Labour with an anti-war vote.
And of course, it wouldn't be an election without Peter Snow. He'll be here with his box of tricks to tell us how the race was won.
Our main news of the morning now. Tony Blair has won an historic third successive election, but with a much reduced majority.
With most of the seats now declared, the latest prediction is a majority for Labour of 66. And this is the state of the parties just a short while ago. Labour are on 353, having lost 47 seats. The Conservatives, 194. They've gained 33. The Liberal Democrats, they're on 59, having gained 11 seats. Plaid Cymru have lost 1 seat. They're down to 3. And the SNP, they've gained 2 seats and they're on 6. And 3 seats went to independent candidates or other parties.
So if we translate that into a share of the vote, Labour took 36.4% of that vote. That's down 5.8% on last time. It's also worth noting it's the lowest ever share of the vote for a winning party. The Conservatives were up 0.6% on 33.1, while the Liberal Democrats took 22.6%, up 3.9.
Well, the Prime Minister said the British people wanted a return of a Labour government, but with a reduced majority, and he promised to respond to that sensibly and wisely. The Conservatives said the public had wanted to cut Tony Blair down to size and make him more accountable, and the Liberal Democrats said they were now the only truly national party and were becoming the real challengers to Labour.
Well, our political correspondent Sean Lay looks now at the story of the night.
Tony Blair returned to London this morning after securing a third successive term as Prime Minister. It's a record equalled only by Margaret Thatcher. The pro-hunting campaigner Otis Ferry briefly spoiled the victory celebration before being bundled away by Mr Blair's entourage. Anger over a variety of issues may explain the other aspect to Labour's win, that it's been achieved with the smallest share of the vote ever won by a government. Still, Mr Blair told party workers they should be pleased with the result.
We've got a mandate to govern this country again. Yes, there are good comrades that have fallen, but there are also extraordinary results that have come through tonight. And we've got to listen to the people and respond wisely and sensibly. But they have made it very clear. They wanted to carry on with Labour and not go back to the Tory years.
One possible explanation for his smaller majority, Iraq. Earlier at his own count in Sedgefield, Mr Blair listened as Reg Keys, who stood against him in protest at the death of his son in the war, delivered a blunt message.
I hope in my heart that one day the Prime Minister may be able to say sorry. That one day he will say sorry to the families of the bereaved.
8 years ago, it was Stephen Twiggs' unexpected victory against Michael Portillo which summed up the Labour landslide. His defeat this time illustrated the bigger-than-expected swing back to the Tories in London.
Shapps Grant V, the Conservative Party candidate, 22,100.
Other Labour ministers suffered a similar fate. Although Michael Howard has led the Conservatives to their third successive election defeat, he thinks his party's performance vindicates his leadership.
What has happened on this election day marks a significant step towards our recovery. I am proud of the campaign that we have fought. We have taken a stand on the things that really do matter to the people of our country. We have sent a message to Mr Blair.
It began well for the Tories, defeating Labour in Putney, but a good night in London was not matched elsewhere in the country. Edgbaston was the party's most winnable seat in Birmingham, but it was Labour who were left smiling both in the Midlands and in much of the north. Charles Kennedy ended the night well pleased by his party's performance, especially the gains made at Labour's expense.
And I think that the era of three-party politics right across the United Kingdom is now with us. That is something that I welcome. I think it is a healthy development.
But not in the way he'd intended. The Liberal Democrats had wanted to defeat leading Tories, but the decapitation strategy largely failed. David Davis holding his seat and only one member of the Conservative top team being ousted. Instead, the party's big gains were against Labour. In seats like Newbury, voters returned to the Tories, perhaps a sign that they now perceive the Liberal Democrats as being to the left of Labour. If so, that will alarm party strategists. Whilst the SNP made gains in Scotland, it was a disappointing night for Plaid Cymru, which lost a seat and failed to win its top target. Wales also saw the Tories win seats for the first time since 1997. For Labour, the sourest moment came towards the end of the night. The anti-war MP George Galloway narrowly won Bethnal Green after a bitter, ill-tempered campaign. His presence in the new Parliament will be a daily reminder to Tony Blair of the electoral price his party seems to have paid over Iraq. Sean Lay, BBC News.
I'll just let you know in a few minutes' time we're going to be hearing from Sir Michael Rifkind, who is back as a Conservative MP.
Certainly is. But first, let's cross over to Downing Street and talk to our political correspondent, James Landale. Good morning to you, James. Now, we saw the Prime Minister arriving back there, just over an hour ago. No doubt he's catching a few hours' sleep. But what's going to be first on his plate when he wakes up?
Well, when he wakes up, he has a brief date with the Queen. We expect he goes over to there formally to ask permission to form a government. Obviously, a sort of little quirk of our monarchical constitution, if you like. The Queen is formally the person who recommends the creation of the new government and basically says who's the man who has the largest majority in the House of Commons, and Tony Blair says it's me. So he does that, it's a formality, and then he comes back and starts a lot of work on his new cabinet and the rest of the government. Governments these days are very large and there are a lot of names to go through, so all his advisors will be sitting there while he's catching up on his sleep, doing all the maths and trying to work out who can be in which place where.
It was interesting, wasn't it, listening to his victory speech, I suppose, when he said that he would listen and respond to the message he's got from the electorate. But what do you think he means precisely?
Well, I think what he means is that he's acknowledging the fact that, you know, the voters have spoken. He has a much smaller majority. We said all throughout this campaign that the voters didn't have a little box on their voting slip saying Tony Blair but with a small majority, but that's what they seem to have got. That's what they've chosen. And so I think the Prime Minister now is going to have to acknowledge the fact that on a personal level his authority is diminished, but also, I mean, in straightforward parliamentary terms, with a majority of 66, if we think that's what it's going to end up as, he's not going to be able to do everything he wants to do. For example, ID cards. He's promised to bring that one back in, but on a majority of 66 with the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats and a lot of his backbenchers ranged against it, he might have to think again. That's just one issue.
OK, James, thanks very much.
Meanwhile, Jonathan Beale is at the Conservative Party headquarters in central London for us this morning. Good morning to you, Jonathan. And what have we heard from Michael Howard overnight?
Well, we've heard from Michael Howard in his constituency that he believes they've made real progress, that he's proud of the campaign he ran. He is due here at about 10 o'clock, we understand. Michael Ancram, member of the Shadow Cabinet, already gone in, said that he was pleased overall with the result. I think there's modest satisfaction from the Tories. They have made progress here in London. They've made progress in the southeast, in Wales too, but frustration too, because overall their share of the vote still around 33%. That's not the breakthrough they hoped for.
Yes, we understand as well. He said that there's a real advance towards Conservative recovery. Nevertheless, there are going to be questions asked about his leadership and how long he can continue being leader of the Conservative Party.
Yes, I think what's interesting, we haven't heard from Tories attacking Michael Howard's campaign, really. There have been some criticisms about his focus on immigration, but broadly speaking, there's been quite a lot of party discipline, I think. And there is credit too being given to Michael Howard for the way he led from the front. This was very much his campaign. He was always in front of the cameras. He was always the man making the arguments. So I think the party discipline is there. I don't think there is an appetite for a change of leader, certainly at the moment. But there is the big question, what happens at the next election? Because remember, Michael Howard, 63, he'll be in his late 60s when the next election comes up. And questions as to whether he'll be the right man then to lead the party.
Jonathan Beale from Conservative HQ this morning. Thank you.
Well, our reporter Branwen Jeffries is at the Liberal Democrat headquarters at Cowley Street in central London, from where she joins us. A very good morning to you, Branwen. Now, our number crunchers tell me that this is the best result for the Lib Dems since 1929, so no doubt a sense of satisfaction at the very least there.
Certainly they feel as though they've consolidated their position in Parliament, a very respectable increase in their share of the vote, although of course that translates into fairly modest gains in terms of number of seats. By and large, they did best where they took votes from Labour. They saw some quite substantial swings in some of the cities. In Manchester, for example, in Withington, they overturned a majority by Labour of 11,000 at the last election to take what was a safe Labour seat. They did very well in areas where there were large numbers of students, cities like Cambridge and Leeds amongst them. They're now saying that they are the only truly national party, having made gains not just in England, but also, of course, in Wales and Scotland.
But Bramwell, they didn't seem to do as well, perhaps, as they expected against the Conservatives, especially those high-profile Conservatives that they thought they might have a chance with.
Well, they certainly concentrated a great deal of effort in terms of people and resources on trying to unseat several members of the shadow cabinet. In that, they were unsuccessful, apart from Tim Collins, who was the Conservative education spokesman in the last Parliament, who lost his seat in the Lake District by just over 200 votes. But other than that, they may be reviewing this morning their position vis-à-vis the Conservatives. Where they lost seats, it mainly was to the Conservatives, and they didn't do as well as they hoped in taking seats where there was a Lib Dem Conservative marginal.
OK, Bramwell, thank you very much.
So, Tony Blair is back in number 10, the first Labour leader in history to be elected for a third term.
To remind us how he got there, here's Peter Snow, the king of the swingometer.
Well, here we have it. It's a Labour victory, all right, but it's less of a one than last time. I'm now going to show you that the map is colouring up, flashing the gains here. More blue than it was last time, more gold than it was last time for Liberal Democrat. Start in London. You can see a substantial number of Tory gains there. And George Galloway, by the way, coming and taking Bethnal Green as an independent, that grey one in the middle of town there. And as you go up the map, so you see a lot of these Tory gains going out into the countryside here. The Tories with about 31 net gains altogether, and the Liberal Democrats a dozen or so. The Tories even back in Scotland, in Dumfriesshire here, flashing away there. And the swing all over the country, an average swing of 3% to the Tories. They did better in the marginals. That's why they're doing rather better than that swing would suggest. Now, the crucial story in this election has been that Mr. Blair had 80 seats in the old House of Commons that comprised his majority. He had to hold on to enough of these seats, each of them with little figures on there, as you can see, mainly in the Midlands, the North and the South East, there in clusters around the conurbations. He had to hold on enough of these seats to retain his majority. And here they go. I'm going to put them up now on Blair's battleground. We've numbered them from 1 to 80. Top left is the most marginal, bottom right are the least marginal. So the safest ones for Mr. Blair are over that side, the unsafest ones up over here, the easiest ones for the Tories and Liberal Democrats to turn blue and gold here. Let's see what's actually happened then in Blair's battleground. There you are, a lot of successes for the Tories and Liberal Democrats in the first 2 or 3 columns, but by the time you get down here, apart from a few parachutists up here like Gravesham, on the whole, the Labour Party is surviving. Let's just bunch them together now and you'll see exactly how many gains we can reckon the Tories will end up with. 31 net gains, the Tories, a couple of independents here winning, most unusual election, a couple of Scottish National Party. Otherwise, the Labour Party holding on in just under half of these vital seats that they really had to hold on to retain their majority. So, there it is, a majority for Tony Blair of 66 forecast on a share of the vote that looks like this. Here we have the share of the vote all over the country, 36% Labour, just 3% ahead of the Tories. The Liberal Democrats on 23, and there are the others there on 8%. Now, that share of the vote, if that's what it ends up as, looks as if it will, that share of the vote will be the lowest winning party's share of the vote in British electoral history.
John Snow there. Well, joining me now in the studio, Breakfast political correspondent Sean Lay, who's been following the twists and the turns of this election campaign with us here on the sofa. Good morning again to you, Sean. So a third historic term. We've all been up all night, haven't we? A third historic term for the Prime Minister. Nevertheless, there is a clear swing away from the government.
They certainly can't afford to gloat with this result. It's been good for them in some surprising areas. For example, in Kent, where I think Labour had been quite worried it was going to see significant losses. In the end, it's lost one of its ministers down there, but it's held some of the seats it would have expected the Tories to take back. But it will be governing with a much reduced majority, and that does mean that it only needs sort of 34 or so Labour rebels on a big issue. James was talking about ID cars just a few minutes ago. That would be a good example of that for the government to be defeated. So it's going to be a tighter Parliament, a more difficult Parliament for the Prime Minister. His aides say he can govern comfortably with this, but it will raise the question of how soon he will decide to hand over the reins of power, having told us that this is his final election as Labour leader.
Better news for Michael Howard than was predicted.
Up to a point, I think that's true. They targeted their seats very effectively, and as a result result of that, they made some big gains, big swing to the Tories in parts of London, some seats there that they weren't expecting to get, but some surprising misses, notably in the Midlands, notably in the north of England. They're pleased they got seats back in Wales at last. They will be rather surprised to have lost Solihull, for instance, on the edge of Birmingham. That wouldn't have been a seat they would have expected to lose, and they will be disappointed at their performance, I think, overall. But certainly it means Michael Howard now isn't going to be under pressure to quit as Tory leader at this stage.
And finally, very quickly, for the Liberal Democrats, Charles Kennedy there saying this is the start of three-party politics all over again.
Well, he says that. In fact, it's the start, effectively, of two-party politics. Lib Dems versus Labour in the Midlands and the North, it seems. Lib Dems versus Conservatives in the south of England. Disappointing, a few misses against the Tories, but on the whole, they'll be pleased that they did so well against Labour.
OK, Sean, thank you very much. More for you later on.
No, it's 8:17 if you've just joined us. The main news this morning is a historic third successive election victory for Tony Blair, but he's won with a reduced majority. With most of the seats declared, the latest prediction is a majority for the Labour Party of 66.
That's right. Well, Labour's share of the vote was the lowest ever for a winning party. The Prime Minister said that the victory was, quote, an extraordinary achievement, and he promised to build on those successes. He said he would respond to what the British people wanted, quote, again, sensibly and wisely and responsibly.
The Conservative leader, Michael Howard, said the time had now come for action and not talk from Mr Blair. He called on the Labour leader to deliver on the things that really matter to the people of our country.
And the Liberal Democrats achieved their best result for more than 80 years. Their leader, Charles Kennedy, said that Britain no longer had a two-party political system. Well, it may be a long way from the glories of the past, but the Tories say that they're happy with the night's result.
Well, Malcolm Rifkind, a familiar face, returns to Parliament after a 7-year break to the seat of Kensington and Chelsea. It really would have been a turn-up for the books if you'd lost that one. Congratulations to you,
Well,
Mr.
thank
Rifkind.
you very much indeed.
Now, what do you read into the results from the Conservative point of view?
Well, I think there's two things that I would draw attention to. First of all, of course, the remarkable collapse of the government's overall majority, down from over 160 to, we expect, somewhere in the 60s. That means we're really back to a quite different House of Commons that we've seen for the last 7 years. And, of course, our share of the vote, the gap between ourselves and the Labour Party, now only a mere 3% compared to 9% after the last general election. So the Tory party is back in business, but we've got a long way to go. And we really have to start now, making sure we fill that gap.
I mean, you talk about that long way to travel, but could you have made more of a start on it this time round? Tim Collins, your former shadow education spokesman, who, of course, was defeated by the Lib Dems, he said he thinks you would have done better if you'd run a more positive campaign. Do you agree?
Well, I think Michael Howard's done an excellent campaign. You know, he only took over as leader 18 months ago. The party was in a very bad state under Ian Duncan Smith, and that is something everyone recognises. Within that relatively short period of time, he has delivered us a substantial number of gains. He has been able to ensure that we win not just against Labour. We've won back a whole host of seats from the Liberal Democrats, and that's well worth remembering. There's quite a great significance in that.
But the dog whistling, the concentration on immigration, calling Mr Blair a liar?
Well, you know, we have ended up at the end of this campaign winning more seats than we've won for the last 10, 12 years. We have reversed the decline that we have been experiencing for quite some time. Most of the people cheering last night were Tories, a few Liberals as well, not many people in the Labour Party. Now, that does speak for itself.
And what about the leadership? If you hadn't done so well, it was thought that Mr Howard might not last very long, and your name was one of those mentioned for the leadership. Would you like to see Michael Howard fight the election in 2009 or 2010?
I think Michael's earned his right to do so. Of course, it's up to Michael what he wishes to do, but he's earned his right to do so. The party will be extremely grateful to him because he has not only provided leadership, but he's delivered results. But he would be the first to acknowledge that we still have round about 200 seats. We need to win a lot more seats to form a government. Therefore, we have to start now planning for the next campaign, building on the strengths of what we have achieved. And the fact that we've won back seats from the Liberal Democrats that we'd lost to them shows that their results actually just depend on who is unpopular. They're not a serious national force any longer. But you know, they win seats from the Labour Party when they're unpopular, but they lose them back to us when we are regaining ground.
Just on that issue, Mr Howard, though, I mean, he'd be the first to admit, and I'll put this delicately, he has got a few miles on the clock. I mean, he will be knocking on a bit in 4 years' time.
Well, you know, you judge somebody by their energy, by their enthusiasm, by their ability to provide leadership. He's provided all three, and I think he has every reason, if he wishes, to continue, because the party will appreciate what he has already achieved, and no doubt he can achieve a lot more.
OK, Malcolm Rifkind, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Well, one of the shock results of the night was the return of George Galloway. His Respect coalition unseated Labour's Una King after fighting a bitter campaign on the Iraq war. Well, let's speak to Mr. Galloway. Good morning to you. Congratulations. Your results surprised many. Your results surprised many. Did it surprise you?
No, I always felt that it was coming our way, and in fact, throughout East London, there's a big swing to us. We're only a year old, and yet we came second in both of the Newham seats, East Ham and West Ham. We got 20% of the vote in the next door to me, Poplar and Canning Town, and I won in Bethnal Green and Bow. So throughout East London, Respect is a growing political force, and I predict that we'll win control of both the local authorities next May. So we're here to stay.
Nevertheless, it was a rather ill-tempered campaign, wasn't it? And highly controversial at that. Do you regret at all the way it was handled?
Well, I don't think it was as controversial as the media made out. There were one or two incidents. Most of the serious ones happened to me, but I wasn't complaining. Most of the time I was able to walk around freely campaigning, as all the candidates were. And on polling day, we had a perfectly peaceful election, although we had a bit of a shambolic count. It took us 7 hours to count the number of votes that Sunderland counted in 43 minutes. Which goes to show there are a few problems in Tower Hamlets.
Yeah, you campaigned on a single issue, though, didn't you, really? Essentially Iraq. At some point, that is going to move into the history books and it is going to simmer down. Are you still going to have the same passion?
No, honestly, you're quite wrong about that. We campaigned about the overcrowded housing here, about the worst schools in London here, about the dirtiest hospital in London here. And I'm standing in Brick Lane where Crossrail is going to be devastating the community here for years to come. So, in fact, the local, national and international issues all fused into one. We fought on them all. We have a programme for all the domestic, economic, social and other needs of the people. We put them before the people and they chose us.
You fought on all the issues, but looking back at your voting record last time you were an MP, it was fairly low. Are you planning to spend more time in Parliament this time round?
Well, I don't think that's true. Since I was expelled by Labour, I've been no longer required to vote for the government's motions, and I seldom wish to vote for Michael Howard's amendments. And that's all you can do in Parliament. You either must vote for the Prime Minister's motion or Michael Howard's amendment, and I seldom wish to vote for either. But I can assure you that I'll be serving the constituents here assiduously, and they'll have someone standing up for them. I'll be their man in Westminster rather than Tony Blair's woman here in Tower Hamlets.
Clearly you're a happy man this morning. Would you be happier if Labour had lost?
No, not at all. If it needed me, I'd certainly be voting for a Labour government rather than a Tory one. And we'll support a Labour government when it acts in the interests of the people we represent, and I'll oppose it when it does not. The problem for Labour is we are the ghost of Labour's past. We're standing for the things that Labour used to believe in and representing the people Labour used to represent.
George Galloway from Bethnal Green, thank you very much.
Now, enough politics. I'm voting for a bit of weather now. Here's Carol. Good morning.
Join you there.
Good morning. It's a chilly start to the day if you're out in the breeze, but not a bad one for many parts of the country. We've got bits and pieces of cloud around and also some showers. The showers predominantly at the moment in the north and west of Scotland, but we do have some just affecting parts of England and Wales too. But some of us, blue skies to start the day, hazy sunshine or indeed cloud. And we've got low cloud at the moment in the southwest of England. That's producing some drizzle, and through the afternoon the cloud will thicken up in Northern Ireland, and here too we're likely to see some rain, and by evening in Northern Ireland the rain's likely to be quite heavy. For the rest of us this afternoon, again sunshine and showers, variable amounts of cloud at times and quite breezy or windy depending on which end of the country you're in. In the wind it will feel cooler. Temperatures perhaps peaking at about 16 degrees Celsius today, and in the sun that will feel nice. 16 is 61 Fahrenheit. Now if we go back to pick up that rain in Northern Ireland, through this evening and tonight, watch the track it takes, moving steadily from Northern Ireland through England and Wales, and then eventually clearing off onto the near continent. But it could be quite heavy for a time overnight in East Anglia, and it could also be accompanied by quite gusty winds, even gusting to gale force along the coast of England and Wales. As a result, it's not going to be a particularly cold night for southern areas, but for the north, it will be that bit nippier. For example, in the Highlands, we've got an overnight low of 1 degree Celsius, so you just might see a touch of frost here. So chilly start in the Highlands tomorrow morning, but ostensibly a dry and a bright one. We're looking once again tomorrow at sunshine and showers. Now, some of the showers may well be heavy, and some of the showers to higher ground in the far north of Scotland, we're talking about the mountains really, could well be wintry. Elsewhere, as I mentioned, sunshine and showers, the best of the sunshine in the southwest, and that too can be said as we sweep into Sunday. The best of the sunshine here, elsewhere, sunshine and showers, and still wintry in the hills and the mountains of the north of Scotland. That's it for now. Back to Natasha and Dermot.
Carol, thanks.
Now you can find out much more about the election results from our interactive television service. If you're watching digitally, you can press red to access our multi-screen.
All the results are on CFAX page 700 and on our website at bbc.co.uk/election 2005.
We're back at the top of the hour with all the top stories for you. In the next hour, we're going to be looking at Tony Blair's plans and the possible pitfalls ahead during a third term.
Now we join our news teams across the UK.
Good morning from BBC London News. I'm Asad Ahmed. It's been a bad night for Labour in the capital. Take a look at the new political map. There's been a swing of nearly 5% from Labour to the Conservatives. But Labour also lost a key safe seat in Bethnal Green and Bow. Una King narrowly lost what was a 10,000 majority to the Respect Party candidate George Galloway. The result followed a tense and vitriolic election campaign in the East London seat, which has a large number of Muslim voters. There were some significant Conservative gains in London too, largely at Labour's expense. The Conservatives' first win of the evening was Putney with Justine Greening. Another Tory gain was Enfield Southgate, where former London Schools Minister Stephen Twigg was toppled with a swing of 8.7%. And there were Tory gains in Croydon Central, Ilford North, Wimbledon, Hammersmith, Bexley Heath, Hemel Hempstead, Guildford, Hornchurch and St Albans. And the first ever black Tory MP, Adam Afriyi, managed to hold Windsor for the Tories. Well, Lib Dem London Assembly member Lynn Featherstone beat off Labour's Barbara Roach in Hornsey and Wood Green, and Sarah Tether held on to her Brent East constituency that she won from Labour in a by-election in 2003. Well, a number of minor parties have seen their votes go up. In Barking in Essex, the British National Party polled 17% of the vote, their highest in the UK. And that's the election roundup for now. Let's get the latest travel news with Kate Allen. Hi there, Kate.
Hello, Asad. If you are heading out and about this morning, not looking too bad actually for the tubes. All seems to be running quite well so far this morning. Have got some problems for the overground trains though, with South Eastern down through Rochester. At the moment, trains are unable to pass through Rochester after a road vehicle hit a bridge down there. So some trains are being diverted via Dartford, and you can expect delays of around 15 minutes. Out on the roads, a few accidents to watch out for as well this morning. Firstly, the M40 northbound between junctions 3 and 4 up towards Hanley Cross. One lane closed there due to a crash. Another accident down on the A21 Farnborough Common. It's on the southbound carriageway. It's down to one lane at the junction of Wellbrook Road, just near the Farnborough Hospital. Also, one lane closed on the A13 at the Goresbrook interchange, heading towards London. Traffic is looking a bit slow through there this morning. Now, looking at the cameras, down on the south side of Rotherhithe Tunnel, looking very busy on Jamaica Road through Bermondsey. That's due, of course, to the closure of Tower Bridge. Both directions closed. Lots of traffic using London Bridge as an alternative route. We've also got queues down in Tootingbeck past the junction with the tube station. That's it from me. Asad.
Kate, thanks for all that this morning. Now look at the weather forecast, and this will be mainly dry with some sunny intervals, turning cloudy later. The top temperature will reach 16 degrees Celsius. Well, we've got a team of election experts on hand to answer your questions on the BBC London Election Special programme. That's in half an hour at 9 o'clock here on BBC One with Emily Maitlis. Send your questions to our usual address. It's on your screen now, yourlondon@bbc.co.uk. We'll see you then. Bye-bye for now.
Hello there, this is Breakfast with Natasha, Kaplinsky and Dermot.
Our main news of the morning, Tony Blair has won an historic third successive election, but with a much reduced majority.
Now, with most of the seats declared, the latest prediction is a majority of 66, and this is the state of the parties a short while ago. Labour are on 353 seats, having lost 47. The Conservatives have gone up to 195. They've gained 33 seats. The Lib Dems, they've gained 11. They're on 59. Plaid Cymru down 1 to 3. And the Scottish National Party, they gained 2 seats and they're on 6. And 3 seats went to independent candidates or other parties.
Now, if we translate that into a share of the overall vote, Labour took 36.4%. That's down 5.8% on last time. It's also worth noting that the lowest ever share of the vote for the winning party was given to Labour. The Conservatives were up to 0.6% on 33.1%, while the Liberal Democrats took 22.6%, up 3.9%.
Well, the Prime Minister said the British people wanted a return of a Labour government, but with a reduced majority, and he promised to respond to that sensibly and wisely and responsibly. The Conservatives said the public had wanted to cut Tony Blair down to size and make him more accountable. And the Liberal Democrats said they were now the only truly national party and were becoming the real challengers to Labour.
Our political correspondent Sean Lay now has the story of the night.
Tony Blair returned to London this morning after securing a 3rd successive term as Prime Minister. It's a record equalled only by Margaret Thatcher. The pro-hunting campaigner Otis Ferry briefly spoiled the victory celebration before being bundled away by Mr Blair's entourage. Anger over a variety of issues may explain the other aspect to Labour's win, that it's been achieved with the smallest share of the vote ever won by a government. Still, Mr Blair told party workers they should be pleased with the result.
We've got a mandate to govern this country again. Yes, there are good comrades that have fallen, but there are also extraordinary results that have come through tonight. And we've got to listen to the people and respond wisely and sensibly. But they have made it very clear. They wanted to carry on with Labour and not go back to the Tory years.
One possible explanation for his smaller majority, Iraq. Earlier at his own count in Sedgefield, Mr Blair listened as Reg Keyes, who stood against him in protest at the death of his son in the war, delivered a blunt message.
I hope in my heart that one day the Prime Minister may be able to say sorry. That one day he will say sorry to the families of the bereaved.
8 years ago, it was Stephen Twiggs' unexpected victory against Michael Portillo which summed up the Labour landslide. His defeat this time illustrated the bigger-than-expected swing back to the Tories in London.
I do hereby declare
Shapps Grant V, the Conservative Party candidate, 22,100.
Other Labour ministers suffered a similar fate. Although Michael Howard has led the Conservatives to their 3rd successive election defeat, he thinks his party's performance vindicates his leadership.
What has happened on this election day marks a significant step towards our recovery. I am proud of the campaign that we have fought. We have taken a stand on the things that really do matter to the people of our country. We have sent a message to Mr Blair.
It began well for the Tories, defeating Labour in Putney, but a good night in London was not matched elsewhere in the country. Edgbaston was the party's most winnable seat in Birmingham, but it was Labour who were left smiling both in the Midlands and in much of the north. Charles Kennedy ended the night well pleased by his party's performance, especially the gains made at Labour's expense.
And I think that the era of 3-party politics right across the United Kingdom is now with us. That is something that I welcome. I think it is a healthy development.
But not in the way he'd intended. The Liberal Democrats had wanted to defeat leading Tories, but the decapitation strategy largely failed. David Davis holding his seat and only one member of the Conservatives' top team being ousted. Instead, the party's big gains were against Labour. In seats like Newbury, voters returned to the Tories, perhaps a sign that they now perceive the Liberal Democrats as being to the left of Labour. If so, that will alarm party strategists. Whilst the SNP made gains in Scotland, it was a disappointing night for Plaid Cymru, which lost a seat and failed to win its top target. Wales also saw the Tories win seats for the first time since 1997. For Labour, the sourest moment came towards the end of the night. The anti-war MP George Galloway narrowly won Bethnal Green after a bitter, ill-tempered campaign. His presence in the new Parliament will be a daily reminder to Tony Blair of the electoral price his party seems to have paid over Iraq. Sean Lay, BBC News.
Our political correspondent James Landale is in Downing Street for us this morning. Let's talk to him. Good morning to you, James. We saw the Prime Minister arriving not so long ago, a jubilant arrival, but nevertheless subdued.
Yeah, I mean, there was none of the triumphalism that we've had in recent elections, certainly not in 1997. Although I have to say, it struck me fairly similar to the tone that we had in 2001. Today we've had from the Prime Minister, we must listen, we must learn. In other words, we must respond to what the voters have said, namely we want a Labour government but with a much smaller majority. Back in 2001, I can remember him standing here and saying, look, what this election has been is an instruction to deliver. The tone was not too dissimilar from what we had today.
And what is happening today?
Well, essentially the Prime Minister now is getting a bit of kip. It is his birthday, so he ought to be allowed a little bit of sleep at some stage. Then we expect him at some stage in the middle of the morning to go and see the Queen, just the other side of St James's Park. He's always known as kissing hands. In other words, formally getting the permission from the Queen to form the new government as the man who is the leader of the party that has the largest majority in Parliament. And then he'll come back here and get to work on his new cabinet and the rest of his government.
Thanks, James.
Now, throughout the campaign, we've been hearing from our special panel of 3G video voters right here on Breakfast.
In their final report, we asked a selection of them how they voted and what they thought of the result.
I personally chose to vote strategically and voted Lib Dem here in Eastern Bartonshire. And at least that lady got in place of a Labour opposition candidate. So small gains from the night. I only hope that the Labour Party take cognizance of the fact of being given a drubbing and behave more responsibly this time around.
Naturally, I'm disappointed that the Labour Party will be returning to power. However, with only some 36% of the vote, I hope they will take on board the dissatisfaction of 2/3 of us with what they have previously delivered.
I'm pleased to see that we've gained some seats from Labour. I'm sad to see that we've lost a few seats to the Conservatives in the South. I'm not that impressed with the Conservative gains. Their vote hasn't really improved that much. All it is that people who used to vote for Labour haven't voted for Labour, and the Conservatives have picked up seats.
The Conservatives, who looked as if they might be able to pull off a decent election campaign, shot themselves in the foot by highlighting the issue of trust. As Michael Howard scathingly attacked Tony Blair, I certainly noted the irony that after all's been said and done over Iraq, the Tories would have done exactly the same as Labour and fundamentally supported them.
I'm a Labour supporter, but in this election I ended up voting Liberal Democrat. It wasn't just about the Iraq war. Labour has abandoned some core Labour principles in this term, and I felt a protest was necessary to send Labour a message that this is not acceptable.
Just a sample of some of our viewers' views there. Now, all the parties can find something to be happy about in the general election this morning, and of course, they can all tell us at length why their opponents should be upset.
Yeah, and they have been doing so. Well, here to referee the arguments is the BBC's political editor, Andrew Marr, still up after his overnight stint. Well, very glad to have you here with us, Andrew.
Yeah.
Now, let's start with Tony Blair. Now, he's staying on, of course, for this historic third term for a purpose, a Blairite purpose, presumably. But does he have the majority now to achieve it?
Well, on lots of issues, I have to say I rather doubt that, because you look at this projected 66 and you ask yourself how many of them are Blairites and how many of them are, in one way or another, irreconcilables, malcontents, dissidents, you know, however you call them. Plenty of names that I can see who've come back to Parliament who will not be part of Tony Blair's majority. And then you look at the sort of things he wants to do. He wants to reform welfare. In a kind of tough, aggressive way, looking at invalidity benefit and that kind of thing. I don't think he's got a majority for that. Compulsory ID cards? I'm not sure he's got a majority for that. And so on, you go down the list. And I wonder whether in a year's time, if he's still there in a year's time, assuming he's still there in a year's time, he will be quite frustrated.
Well, it's interesting you say if there, Andrew. I mean, could it be a case of him going sooner rather than later?
It could well be, and there'll be plenty of people inside the Parliamentary Labour Party who will hope that happens. He is Prime Minister, he has patronage, he has all of that still at his disposal, and he has said he's determined to carry on, and he's a determined character, so he may well intend to do that. Nevertheless, I think his own authority, his own power inside the party has been quite diminished by what's happened. You know, we all said all the way through, well, if the British public wants Tony Blair back or wants Labour back, but with his wing severely clipped, that's not on the ballot paper. That can't be easy. That's not easily achieved. It's exactly what's happened.
OK, let's talk through the other parties. The Lib Dems, I mean, once again going to be frustrated by the vagaries of the electoral system, but a good night nevertheless for them.
A very good night for them. not only in terms of the headline seats that they've got, and they've won all sorts of seats, some of them quite remarkable. I mean, Manchester, Wythenshawe's extraordinary result for them. But also look at where they're second placed now. All across the country, against Labour and the Conservatives, they've got Lib Dems breathing down their necks. And therefore, Charles Kennedy's claim that we're now into three-party politics is, I don't think that's hubris, I don't think that's exaggeration. I think the British political system has changed as a result of this election, and it's going to be more fluid, more unpredictable as a result.
But can they face both ways? Can they appeal to disaffected Conservative voters and Labour ones at the same time?
That is the big question. I mean, the evidence of the evening is that they did much less well against Labour. Now, they talked about their decapitation strategy, but frankly, and without being in any sense offensive to him, ending up with Tim Collins as your victim, it's a bit like going for, you know, Louis XVI. There's some kind of very minor count in your basket at the end of the day at the bottom of the guillotine. It's not exactly a roaring success.
And what about the Conservatives? Leadership questions, of course, for them as well, but we're not going to see anything like we saw in 1997 and 2001 of the leader going fairly soon after the result.
I would have thought Michael Howard would have done enough to be allowed to stay on for as long as he wants. He will probably not want to stay on to fight the next election, but he'll want to stay on to ensure the transition isn't too bloody and that the party has plenty of time to think about where it's going and what it wants to do next. There are plenty of people who want his job. And there's no doubt going to be some lively discussion inside the Tory party. The danger for the Tory party is that they have done just well enough not to have a serious and difficult conversation about their own future, and they've done just well enough to have the one more heave tendency succeeding. I think that would be a big mistake. I mean, you know, they're still a long, long way from reaching into sort of middle Britain in the way that they need to oust Labour properly from power. So that's the challenge for them.
And talk us through the parliamentary sessions ahead. You've said it's very difficult for Tony Blair with his own backbenchers around to get through his agenda. But what about the opposition? Can the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats find common cause often enough to make life really difficult for Mr Blair?
Well, that's interesting. I think on some of the sort of civil liberties, legal issues, then they probably can. We saw that in the last Parliament over the whole question of ID cards and habeas corpus and so on. On those sorts of issues they can. I wouldn't have thought it would be so easy when it comes down to welfare. Possibly some of the projected reforms to health and education they could agree on. The other big issue, of course, is Europe, which really didn't feature in the campaign, but we are supposed to be seeing a constitutional referendum led by a Prime Minister with a bit less authority. I think there's going to be fireworks on that.
OK, well, Andrew Marr, thank you very much indeed, and appreciate you coming to join us here on Breakfast. Try and get some sleep.
The real question is, how many cups of coffee have you drunk overnight?
I want to know your secret.
Far too many.
Thanks very much, Andrew. The time 8:43. If you've just joined us, the main news for you this morning is a historic third successive election for Tony Blair, but he's won with a reduced majority, with most of the seats declared. The latest prediction is a majority of 66.
Well, Labour's share of the vote was the lowest ever for a winning party. The Prime Minister said the victory was an extraordinary achievement and he promised to build on those successes. He said he would respond to what the British people wanted sensibly and wisely and responsibly.
The Conservative leader Michael Howard said that the time had now come for action and not talk from Mr Blair. He called on the Labour leader to, quote, deliver on the things that really matter to the people of our country.
And the Liberal Democrats achieved their best result for more than 80 years. Their leader, Charles Kennedy, said Britain no longer had a two-party political system.
We're taking a short break from politics now. Carol Kirkwood has a look at the weather. Good morning.
Good morning. The weekend's weather really is sunshine and showers. And if you're planning on going hill walking or climbing rather in Scotland, do bear in mind that we are expecting some sleet and some snow in the highest hills and mountains. What we've got today, though, are quite a few showers around, especially so in the north and west of Scotland, but not exclusively. And for some of us this morning, we're getting off to a cracking start with blue skies and lovely sunshine. But there is a bit of low cloud around at the moment in the southwest of England, and that's producing some drizzle. And by the afternoon, we'll also have thicker cloud and some rain in Northern Ireland, and by evening that will be quite heavy and persistent. Elsewhere, again, variable amounts of cloud through the afternoon, sunshine and showers. Quite breezy or windy depending on which end of the country you're in today, and that will take the edge off the temperature because once again it's coming from the northwest, a chilly direction. And our top temperature today, about 16 degrees Celsius, that's 61 Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, the rain will have cleared away from the southeast of England, and then we're looking at sunshine and showers, the best of which will be in the southwest, and a very similar scenario on Sunday. But don't forget, if you're climbing in Scotland, we're expecting some wintry showers in the mountains. That's it. Back to you two.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you very much, Carol. Well, we've had plenty from the politicians this morning, haven't we? But what do the people who cast their votes actually make of the result?
Well, Bill Turnbull is getting some food for thought, quite literally. Where else? Bill's Cafe in Eastbourne. How are the sausage sandwiches, Bill?
I've got a nice order lined up in just a couple of minutes. Very interesting breakfast platter to show you in a minute or two as well. What do you think of my bijou eatery here in Eastbourne? Very stylish, I think. It's a lovely, bright, sunny day here in Eastbourne. Does that mean it's the bright new dawn of a third Labour term, or perhaps are there clouds on the horizon for Tony Blair? Let's find out what our expert customers here think in the cafe. Good morning, Amanda.
Morning.
How is it for you?
No big surprises, I think, for me. I would have liked it if Mr Blair was out of office. I'm glad the majority's been reduced. I voted Lib Dem myself, and I found that the election as a whole was a bit of a big thing to think about, because I didn't feel any of the parties particularly offered me as a...
They all left you rather cold.
Yeah, no children, single person. Didn't think they had much to offer me as an individual.
OK, all right. Now, of course, Labour's majority significantly reduced. Does that mean that there are complications for Tony Blair's leadership over the next couple of years? Well, Hamish here has been reading the runes this morning and analysing the election result. Do you think Tony Blair, Hamish, is in for real problems now in this third term?
I think he'll hand over to Gordon Brown. I think he has to here. Give Gordon Brown at least a chance of winning a next election. And as far as the Conservatives go, I really think that Tony Howard's done a good job, but he really... Michael Howard, rather. But he needs to hand over to a younger man, or groom a younger man in who is charismatic and going to be a strong Conservative leader.
How long, then, do you think, before Tony Blair will hand over?
I think it will be inevitable. I think he'd have to do within 2 years.
All right, Hamish, thank you very much indeed. Now, of course, we spoke to Steve, the boss, earlier, but we really know who runs the place properly. It's Jan. Morning, Jan.
Good morning.
So, what did you think of the election result overall?
Yeah, I was quite pleased with the result. I'd like to see them stick with what they say they're going to do.
Ah, well, that's a big if, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But, yeah, I was quite pleased.
And what did you think of the campaign overall?
Yeah, I was happy, yeah.
A contented voter, extraordinary. All right, Jan, thank you very much. Jan prepared some expert analysis, actually, for us. We've seen all the whiz-bang graphics that Peter prepared for us, but look at this election platter here. Now, this is important. Look, see, some candidates have ended up with egg on their face, and the winners have taken home the bacon, and a number, of course, well, they'll be feeling a bit like has-beens. Most importantly, some are just toast. It's lovely toast here, too. Bye-bye.
Hope it's not cold. Bill, thanks very much.
Now, it was an historic night for Tony Blair, as you know, who's become the first Labour leader to win 3 elections.
But, of course, with a much reduced majority. So what does this mean for the country, the party and, in particular, the Prime Minister himself? Well, Breakfast's Sarah Campbell takes a look at the road ahead.
The voters have had their say, and though Labour remains in power, the electorate has applied the brakes.
The country has decided it wants a Labour government back with a reduced majority, and that's what appears to be happening.
This reduced majority may mean a bumpier ride for some of Labour's more controversial proposals, such as the introduction of ID cards and encouraging more private sector involvement in health and education.
It does mean that the arithmetic becomes more difficult. If we saw the size of some of the rebellions in the last Parliament, if that were to be repeated, if people were to side, if Labour MPs, Labour rebels were to side with the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives all voting together, there is the possibility of defeat.
And then there's the question of who's going to be taking over the driving seat and when. Tony Blair has said he will not contest another election, so where does that leave the man who's been by his side throughout this campaign? And will Labour's reduced majority influence how long it'll take Blair to hand over power?
There'll be a real battle at the next election for whoever the new leader is, and whoever that leader is going to be deserves to have a good year or two in office as Prime Minister in order to establish themselves before that election. So that puts more pressure on Tony Blair to decide when to go, and to go more quickly than he otherwise would.
Driving through the changes Blair wants to is likely to be more difficult in this third term, with fewer Labour MPs and doubts about how long he'll last. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
Well, the morning after the night before, red eyes all around. We've certainly got a few of them on the sofa, me as well. And we've gathered together our regular election panel this morning. Frederick Forsyth has been backing the Conservatives. John O'Farrell has been fighting Labour's corner. And as you know, Rosie Boycott has been battling for the Liberal Democrats. Good morning. Welcome to all of you. John O'Farrell, let's start with you. We've talked quite a lot of the loss of the seats from the Labour Party today. But there is a danger, isn't there, that the size of the majority of the first two terms that we've sort of talked about quite a bit has actually overshadow the huge success of Labour's third term this time round.
I think that's true. It's like a football team winning 2 games 10-0 and then somebody going, oh, you only won 3-0. It's a terrible disappointment for you. 66 is a big majority if that's what it ends up being. It's bigger than Churchill had. It's bigger than, Ted Heath had or Maggie in her first term. So you can do a lot with the majority of 66. Many governments did.
Well, Frederick Forsyth, that is the point, isn't it? It's still a big majority.
I'd admit it myself, sir.
It's still a bit of a kicking for the opposition.
Nothing if not impartial. I'd admit it myself. Yes, it's quite true. I mean, frankly, when all this schmoozing and backslapping in every corner has stopped, Conservatives are going to have to recognise that they actually set aside, quite rightly, 170 target seats. And they got 33. And that's 20%, or 1/5. Now, in my book, 20% is not success. 20% is failure. So they failed, and they're going to have a post-mortem. Why? Did that campaign, why did that manifesto not set anybody's hay crop on fire? Anywhere.
OK, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Yeah. Let's get there.
The Liberal Democrats view, Rosie, I mean, again, the Liberal Democrats are going to be examining their strategy. Of course, they've made massive gains. And as Charles Kennedy said, this is the start of three-party politics all over again. But nevertheless, they did fail in their decapitation strategy that we heard much about throughout the campaign.
Well, it's true, and you can't get away from it. And on that level, yes, the campaign did not work out. And those very high-profile Tory seats are still, and Labour seats are still Tory and Labour seats. But on the plus side of it, it's a large amount of the popular vote. They're sitting in second place absolutely right across the country, not localised, and they will have a much, much more significant role in the next Parliament because of this reduced majority. I mean, Tony Blair is not going to be able to walk through all these policies, whether they're, say, ID cards, which you just mentioned, and the opposition, of which the Liberal Democrats are a very big part, are going to be really significant now.
OK, well, let's ask John O'Farrell, what problems do you think then that causes for Mr Blair? And do you think Mr Blair is going to serve this full third term, as he has said?
I don't ever think he was going to serve 4 years, because you can't sort of come to an election campaign and say, oh, by the way, I'm off, I'll leave it to the new guy. So I think he would have gone in a couple, 2 or 3 years, whatever. My guess is summer of 2007, that Tony Blair will stand down. Maybe want to beat Maggie's
But do you
record.
think the reduced size of the majority has weakened him and strengthened, of course, Gordon Brown on the other side of the equation?
Yes, I think the way that Gordon Brown's sort of status has risen during this election has been very interesting, and they went out as a pair, and it's almost like an anointment of the sort of successor. So I think nobody else in the Labour Party is going to even try and challenge him the way things are looking at the moment.
Frederick Forsyth, I mean, that's a question that has to be asked of the Conservatives as well, hasn't it? How long has Michael Howard got? He's 63, 64. The next election he'll be 67, 68. That's quite an old age.
Well, I don't know about old age, because, I mean, Miss Churchill actually took over in 1940 and led the nation to victory in the Second World War, starting at 65, which is 2 years older than Michael. So, no, I don't think age is the problem. But we're talking about, bringing up a point from John, there is something intervening, and that, of course, is the Euro election. Now, if there were a massive defeat for a government campaigning for a yes, which may be achieved unless he chooses to rig it.
Face it. I don't think
then I think he may have to go on the basis he'd be so discredited.
If you dismiss the age issue, I mean, in general, do you feel that he has a mandate still to govern the Conservative
Well, I don't think there's going to be a revolt inside 25 Victoria Street. I don't think there'll be a revolt, because it's not done badly enough to provoke what happened to John Major, or what happened to William Hague, or even what happened to Douglas Smith. It's not that bad. It just is. They should have, of 170, I think, a very good chance of getting 80. They got 33. And it is, as you said, it's a comfortable, 66 is a comfortable majority. It's only because people are comparing it with 160, 175. 166 is you can work work a full term on 66.
Just want to talk more numbers with Rosie Boycott. And I know it's a well-worn path with the Liberal Democrats, but just looking at the figures that have come in today, we've got 22.6% of the popular vote, yet under 10% of the seats in Parliament.
I know, and it is really, really unfair as well. And I think that's something that you're saying, Michael Howard seems old, and the youth vote in this election has been so sad and pathetic. And actually, young people have, where they've voted, they've been voting Liberal Democrat. And they are one of the few parties that engage. And I think it's a very important thing for the whole future of democracy that next time round, young people are sort of scooped up into it. And that it really is a case for PR. I mean, the awful truth about PR is it's never the party in power that wants to push through legislation about PR, because they've got there and they don't want to change it.
You have to kind of get lucky, don't you, in an election with first past the post and get a hung parliament and then force that through.
And then force it through. But it is always, it's going to be the same situation again. A lot of people will talk about it. Will anything happen? I doubt it. And that's really sad because it's unfair.
PR of a different sort, though, the Prime Minister's PR. I mean, the authority is such an abstract, intangible thing, isn't it? But nevertheless, the Iraq War did sort of override all the sort of campaigning issues. Has his personal authority been eroded, do you feel?
I think it's he's taken a battering this election, and it seemed Iraq kept coming back and kept coming back. And, you thought it might last for a week, but actually he was still going there right to the end. And I think he was sort of unlucky in that sense, the way it kept coming up.
It's not dead yet, John.
Sorry?
It's not dead yet.
No, I think actually it will.
Why is it unlucky?
But one other grim fact was that a soldier died in the last week.
Soldiers are dying.
I know. I was against the war as well. I agree.
87 men, have died now.
Yes.
I've not heard that mentioned once by New Labour.
But in terms of the way
fine young men to die far away on the basis of a false prospectus.
What I meant
in terms of the way the opposition fought on that issue, I mean, in a way, Mr. Howard picked it up and just called Tony Blair a liar. Do you think that really worked? Do you think that was capitalising on the opportunity?
I think he was being absolutely blunt. I mean, don't forget, he restrained himself for a long time. He sort of misled the House and something. He finally, in the campaign, came out and said what is blatantly true. The man lied. This is a man who lies as he breathes, and why the British public want him to be their representative on this planet Earth, I do not understand. Because there's no way...
Mr. Howard may well have thought that, but, I mean, in terms of an election campaign, it didn't seem to go down very well with the public.
Well, that's maybe the public's perceptions are different, because Anthony Eden lied to us over Suez and was hounded from office by his own party. They wouldn't have a dishonourable man in office. This government will have a dishonourable man in office for 4 years.
John, you must get your word in.
I was just going to say that there's been a lot of talk about that we've had a lot of negative campaigning and they're all as bad as each other. I was actually doing the odd email for the Labour Party and I wanted to do a joke about Michael Howard being a vampire, and the Labour said, no, that's too personal, you can't be that insulting. So the Labour Party were trying not to be quite as insulting as calling him a liar.
Just a last word from the party, the Lib Dems. They said they fought a clean campaign, but do you think they really capitalised on the Iraq issue, the party that opposed the war?
They capitalised on it. I think they could have probably capitalised more, but I rather like the fact, well, in fact, I very much like the fact that they didn't capitalise on the fact that we've got 87 dead young men over there, and, war is a horrible, beastly thing, and I think to use it in that way of calling people liars and doing all that has actually been a sort of cheap shot that to some degree has backfired. It may be some of the reasons why you're saying it's been a bit of a failure.
So you think we should have
there we must end it, I am afraid.
You said the other day you'd gone to war
away
anyway.
from the cameras. Forsyth, Rosie Boycott, John O'Farrell, thank you all very much indeed for joining us.
We'll join you in the green room for more on that later on. Now, though, let's see what's happened to the markets. How have they reacted to another Labour term? Sally Bandle is at the London Stock Exchange. Morning.
Good morning to you. Well, what the markets were looking for today was a clear result in this election, and that is what they got this morning. And so you can see there is little reaction on the FTSE 100 at the moment because, of course, the victory of a new Labour government is what they'd priced in, what they were expecting. And so the news really isn't news here for investors and traders. The pound sterling, though, did wobble a bit earlier as the majority of the Labour government looked slimmer than what was expected, but it has since recovered. And very quickly, Marconi has announced 800 jobs are to be cut there. That's the latest business news from the London Stock Exchange. Back to you both now in the studio.
Thank you very much indeed, Sally. Now, for viewers watching BBC One in England, that's it from Breakfast. Special regional election programmes follow shortly.
But for viewers in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and those watching on BBC News 24, Breakfast continues until 9:30 this morning. We'll see you in a minute.
Hello, good morning. This is BBC London News. Well, if it happened anywhere, it happened here. Waking up to the new look London, ministers fall, the Tories creep back to the capital, and the greatest upset of the night on our doorstep in Bethnal Green.
Mr. Blair, this is for Iraq.
George Galloway mentions the war and removes the Blair babe, Una King. The thin blue line has got thicker as the Tories make gains in the marginals, also this morning.
I'll be getting reaction of leading London figures from the three main parties, here down by the Thames.
And as the walk to work begins for Londoners this morning, we'll be asking them why they walked away from Labour.
Hello, good morning. You join us for a special programme of London election results. If you want to know which party won in your area, keep an eye out for our election ticker at the bottom of your screen throughout the programme. So it was a night when Labour got a bloody nose in the capital and the Tories managed to claw back some seats. Let's get the details on how that capital's political landscape in London changed overnight with our political editor, Tim Donovan. Tim, what's your assessment this morning?
Well, Emily, clearly a story of punishment, Labour being penalised, whether over Iraq, the issue of trust, maybe other things, quality of life issues in London. And this is the result. 74 seats there are in London. Yesterday they held 54. Today they hold 10 fewer. They have lost 8 to the Conservatives. They've lost 1 to Liberal Democrats and 1 to Respect. And clearly it is an issue when you lose a current minister, prominent current minister, and a former minister, but they may reflect that it could have been a lot worse.
Justin Greening, the Conservative Party candidate, 15,000.
A smile to match the size of the swing to her, the Conservatives winning Putney began a night when they did better than expected.
We're now willing to tolerate a government that raises taxes but does not deliver on improved public services. And we're no longer willing to tolerate a government that is simply not straight with people on issues of national importance.
They won in Hammersmith and Fulham too, even if that didn't quite justify the claim of the Tory victor there.
It shows that Conservatives are back in business in inner cities.
Michael Portillo, beaten memorably by this man back in 1997, had been one of those pessimistic about Conservative chances. He proved wrong in his old seat, Stephen Twigg becoming the biggest Tory scalp in the capital.
It is a sad night for me. I have enjoyed very much being the local Member of Parliament here. I think there will be many political lessons to be learnt from the pattern of results across the country.
Everywhere you looked, evidence of Labour punished over the war, the loss of Bethnal Green, a huge setback. The Liberal Democrats, as expected, enjoyed big spoils from the war's effect. Sarah Tether's extension of her majority in Brent East, arguably more spectacular than her original by-election win here.
This pattern of Liberal Democrat gains is being represented across the whole country this evening, and it demonstrates that the Liberal Democrats are the real alternative to Labour.
In Islington South, the Lib Dems came within just 400 votes of winning, and in Hornsey and Wood Green they did win, dissolving a 10,000 Labour majority and dispatching former Home Office Minister Barbara Roach. But across London as a whole, it could have been much worse for Labour. While the Tories won back suburban seats like Croydon Central and Ilford North, they failed to take key targets like Enfield North and Margaret Thatcher's old seat, Finchley and Golders Green. A better night for London Conservatives than Conservatives elsewhere in the country, but still only the beginning of a fight back. So, Emily, something clearly here that the Conservatives can cling on to, a performance which is better than elsewhere in the country. For the Lib Dems too, improvement here in terms of their share of the vote in line with elsewhere in the country. And when you take away the big losses and the big battles for Labour, they too can cling on to something. They still are the dominant party in Labour. We'll have more from here a little later.
Lots to pick up on there, Tim. Thanks very much. Joining us now is Tony Travers from the London School of Economics. Your award, Tony, for coming in so early is orange juice and coffee.
Nice.
Let's talk about what Tim was mentioning there, bringing in the beginning of a fight back. What does a London vote for the Tories mean?
Well, it means that there are now 10 fewer Labour constituencies in London. And
so this was a protest vote, you're saying, or this was about, as Tim mentioned, quality of life?
I think it was a protest vote against a Labour government that's been in power for 8 years, and a quality of life vote, I think, too. I mean, Londoners I think, have a hard time of it quite a lot of the time. And many of these outer London constituencies, I suspect that some of the crime and the immigration type issues will have played well there. Places like Croydon, Bexley Heath and Crayford, Ilford North,
Yes.
Hornchurch, they'll have played well there.
Tony, we'll come back to you a little later in the show. Thanks for that quick update there. Now, it was to be a defining moment, a bitter blow to Tony Blair as Labour lost out in East London to the anti-war party Respect.
I do hereby declare that George Galloway is duly elected a Member of Parliament for Bethnal Green and Bow.
Success then for George Galloway, defeat for Labour's Una King.
The voters of Bethnal Green and Bow have made a different choice and will no longer be represented by a Labour MP. That is their right in a democratic society. And while, of course, I am very disappointed to have lost this election, I'm not afraid to accept the verdict. As a Labour Party here, we remain committed to this place in Tower Hamlets and to the people who live here, not just a flash in the pan, but we, the Labour Party, will be here forever. Thank you.
Well, in a moment, we'll be speaking live to the new MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, George Galloway. First, Gareth Furby, who has been following the candidates throughout the campaign, reports on that fierce battle for Bethnal Green.
My name is George Galloway, and I'm standing for some respect.
He said, I'm gonna buy a gun and start a war. If you can tell me something worth fighting for.
Of course, George Galloway came to the East End preaching peace.
Very nice to see you.
And armed only with words. But they were carefully aimed.
The slaughter of 100,000 people in Iraq. She says she would do the same all over again.
His target was Labour's Una King, who supported the war. And his strategy, to rally voters who disagreed with her.
Remember the liar and the killer, Tony Blair.
Respect, only respect.
Respect is the only party now that has actually listened to the local common people. I'm very much against what happened in Iraq.
I'm fighting for you. I guarantee you will be heard.
I will vote Respect Party.
Why?
Because they are against the war.
But for some others, this was a controversial hand to play.
Why is he coming here pretending he's a Muslim? He just wants the votes, isn't it?
We don't want any opportunists to come and exploit us and use us for his political goal. He has been kicked out from Labour Party. He should fight to go into Labour Party, not to using us.
After one election meeting, this happened. Fighting on the streets. Inside the hall, George Galloway had been left intimidated by a group of fundamentalists opposed to any voting at all.
And we know where you are.
You come here just to be aggressive?
But I'm feeling very threatened by your behaviour.
In Brick Lane, Una King was given a police escort as Respect supporters turned out in force. Earlier, she'd been pelted with eggs, although it's not clear who was responsible. So both candidates met at Bethnal Green Police Station.
That's been really good. First class.
To try to bring some peace to the campaign. But they weren't making friendly gestures for long.
This is the leaflet for the mainly Muslim areas. The word Muslim is printed 13 times, but in the what we might now call the white leaflet, there are precisely none.
I thought, George, it was meant to be peace between you two now.
Well, the truth is that the personal attacks from Una King have not stopped, but this attack is political, not personal.
And then there was this from the Labour camp. Una King meeting a pensioner who believed he'd been attacked by a Respect supporter.
I just wanted to say again how terribly sorry I am. What have they done here on this side of your face?
It's here?
Yeah.
Oh no, this is where they knocked me down.
Both sides insisted they'd done nothing wrong. But caught in the middle and largely ignored by the media were the other parties, with frustration showing here for the Tory candidate.
Respect is dividing the Muslims.
And here for the Liberal Democrat. as all parties came together for a debate on Bangla TV. These scenes recorded when the studio pictures were not being broadcast.
I've actually fought elections for 30 years and you are the worst candidate.
Okay, stand by,
I've ever set eyes
please.
on.
That's fine. You are the worst politician in this Britain, and you will get punishment for it.
If you can tell me something worth fighting for.
The night before the vote, Respect held a rally at a cinema in the constituency. George Galloway received here as a conquering hero. And now that is how the constituents who voted for him may see this ex-Labour MP, now Respect MP, after an election result that has made history.
Well, George Galloway, the MP, joins us now from Bethnal Green. George Galloway, thanks for your time this morning. Allegations there of a Respect supporter attacking a pensioner for not accepting a leaflet. Do you admit this was a dirty campaign you fought?
Well, it would have been fairer if your reporter had acknowledged that the police themselves put out an advisory note to the media which said that they had absolutely no reason to suspect the involvement of any Respect supporter in this assault. Indeed, the allegations that the man made not only were not true, but could not be true, because he said that the assailant threw a leaflet down on top of him after the assault, a leaflet which at that time did not exist.
George
So
Galloway,
it would have been fairer if your reporter had acknowledged that fact. But
George Galloway,
if your point is...
Go on, was it a dirty campaign?
Yeah, if your point is it was a tumultuous campaign, undoubtedly. But I won't take any lessons from New Labour about dirty tricks.
OK, well, let's get on to local issues. You won the seat on a protest vote. What can you offer now you're on the ground?
Well, again, I'm afraid your premise is untrue. I didn't win it on a
don't talk about
protest
premises.
vote.
Tell us what you will offer your constituency now you're their MP, because they must be desperate to hear.
I think you should show a bit more grace. I've just been elected by the people of this constituency.
So tell us what you'll
please
do.
Please don't address me as if you think they've made a historic mistake.
No, the longer you stall on the
elected...
question, the less I think you have an idea of your policy. So tell us what you'll do.
Well, you know, I've waited 20 minutes in the cold for this interview, and I'm getting rather tired of the way BBC interviewers interview me. I've just won an election. I've just overturned a 10,000 Labour majority.
So, do you
it
have
is
any...
one of the most...
Do you have any
I'm going
plans?
to speak, whether you keep interrupting me or not. I'm going to speak. So if you want to spoil this entirely for your viewers, you can do so.
This is not about me, George Galloway. I think our viewers, particularly your constituents, would love to hear what you're going to do for them as their new MP. Why didn't you tell them?
Well, my constituents just voted for me in the last few hours. So they're happy with what I've told them I'm going to do for them, which is this. I'm going to fight for them in the way that their last MP never did. She was Mr. Blair's man in Tower Hamlets. I'm going to be Tower Hamlets' man in Westminster, and I'm going to fight for the people here on Crossrail, on overcrowded housing, on the worst schools in London, which are what the Tower Hamlets schools are, on the dirtiest hospital in London, which is what the Royal London Hospital is. Yep. The people of this constituency have been ill-served by New Labour. That's why they elected me, and that's what I'm going to do for them.
And very briefly, George Galloway, can you see the day when you would rejoin the Labour Party?
No.
Thank you very much. Very brief indeed. Well, let's get some reaction to that. We can go back to our political editor, Tim Donovan, who's now found himself a nice place for a late breakfast. Tim, what do you make of it?
Yes, Emily, I'm joined here by Simon Hughes from the Liberal Democrats, by Mark Field for the Conservatives, and Tony McNulty from Labour. What a blow, a Blair loyalist defeated in this manner in Bethnal Green.
Well, Una was and will be again a very, very good local MP as well, and I think it's the East End's loss, but I think all last night needs to be put into some sort of context. We're told it's a massive Tory recovery. In 1987, they had 58 seats in London.
Yeah, let's just for a moment on Bethnal Green, because he ran this incredibly high-profile campaign. It has succeeded there. Very worrying on that key issue of Iraq for you.
It's, I think, a one-off. I think between that seat and the seat next door, they got a reasonable return in terms of votes. It didn't travel anywhere else of any significance in London.
But you know that his acceptance speech today, questioning some of the electoral procedures, the voting procedures, quite close to home with you, a personal factor there. The returning officer is your partner. And then what do you say about the attack he's launched there?
Well, I thought many of the journalists who were there last night said they'd never heard anything like that in 20, 30, 40 years of covering politics. It was, I think, quite petty, and we'll wait and see where he goes with it.
Mark Field, 8 seats gained. Some would say they're not the ones we expected. What was happening here? Some ones that you didn't think you were going to get did go to you, and others didn't.
I think that's right. I mean, it is certainly a step in the right direction for us, and we've got some terrific new talent coming here in London.
How big a step?
It's just
an eensy-weensy one.
It's a fairly important step. But yes, let's be honest about it. We still only have fewer than 200 MPs. We shouldn't overstate it. But I think here in London, we did particularly well. We've obviously got now some new, fresh talent into the parliamentary party, and that will make a real difference. A quarter now of the Conservative Parliamentary Party are going to be...
How do you feel, though? Because I know you had a lot of reservations about messages, not least the immigration one.
Well, ironically, the 2 seats that we perhaps should have won, and very sadly, Nick Dubois in Enfield North and Andrew Minnear in Finchley and Golders Green didn't win. That may well have...
But do you think without those kind of really hardcore messages here, you should have and could have done much better?
Well, no, funnily enough, I think the issues we tried to get across in our London manifesto only a week ago that talked very much about the whole quality of life issues in London, the expense of London, and the fact that we get a pretty raw deal from the Labour government. That made a real difference, I think, in the Putneys and the Wimbledons, where perhaps there was an argument that it might have gone the other way.
I mean, some fantastic results. I mean, sort of Brent Heath particularly, Hornsey and Wood Green, but in terms of sort of progressing number of seats, not much.
Well, we went at 4%. The Tories went up 1%, Labour went down 8%. You expect a government to go down when they've had such a huge majority. I mean,
huge 97 in 2000.
No. I mean, we made great progress in 2 seats. We held all our other ground. Brent was a very tight contest. It was always going to be a tight contest. Sarah had been a very feisty MP. And the Haringey result, I was up there, as you would imagine, the last few days, was phenomenal.
Do you think this is a kind of meaningful platform for next time?
The answer is yes. I looked at the share of the vote across London, which is the other thing that matters. Labour got 1,100,000, Tories got 900,000, we got 600,000. There are 3 big players. I agree with Tony that Galloway's got nothing, and the rest of us will continue to take it on.
3 of you for the moment. We'll be back here later, but thanks very much indeed. Emily, back to you.
Thanks very much, Tim and guests. Well, despite losing the election nationally, the Conservative Party can take some cheer from their performance in London, as you've been hearing. The Tories have 12 new MPs in London and the South East. A swing of up to 5% in some constituencies has been enough for the Tories to take away a fistful of their key target seats. One of them was Hornchurch. From there, Paul Curran reports.
As predicted, Hornchurch was close, so close it went to a recount. Then, in the small hours of the morning, there was another wake-up call for Labour in London as the Conservatives took a seat they last held in 1997.
Madam Returning Officer, it is a great honour and a great privilege to have been elected as the Member of Parliament for Hornchurch.
It was always going to be a difficult job for John Cryer to hang on to this Hornchurch seat, and so it's proved. His slim majority overturned by the Conservative James Brokenshire. But the swing here to the Conservatives was less than in the rest of the capital. John Cryer had campaigned hard on local issues, and although he personally opposed the war in Iraq, he felt it was the main reason Labour had lost.
So I think that what the government has to do is learn the lesson that the next time George Bush invites them to take part in some adventure somewhere, that we walk in the opposite direction.
The victorious Conservative had also campaigned on local concerns. Immigration was a factor, but not an overriding one.
It was an issue that a lot of people raised with us, and they said to us, well, look, we think that there should be controls on immigration, and that's something that we agree with in terms of your policies. But I wouldn't say that it was one thing over and above everything else.
Here it was mission accomplished for the Conservatives, but they weren't able to repeat this success in enough other seats to make the night their own. Paul Curran, BBC London News in Hornchurch.
Well, we're joined now by Justine Greening, the new MP for Putney, and Derek Conway, the MP for Old Bexley and Sidcup. But Justine, you were one of those who never campaigned that strongly on the immigration line. Did it slightly embarrass you? Were you trying to move away from that particular line there?
Not at all. I think if there was one policy that most people in the country understood the Conservatives were putting forward, it was this policy on controlling immigration.
And that worked in Putney, you think?
Absolutely. I very rarely met people who
preferred the chaos of the system that we've got now to what we were proposing, which was clear and firm rules as to how we should process asylum seekers and economic migrants going forward.
Derek Conway, as we said at the beginning, the thin blue line has got thicker for you. Still a long way off the mid-80s. What needs to happen to really push you back into the capital and give you that credibility?
A bit like a reinvigorated army, if you like, because we did take a heck of a pasting in '97. It didn't really move anywhere in 2001, and Justin and I were just talking earlier, you could feel it on the ground. It wasn't moving. It was moving this time, and what you've now got is, in London, you've got some of the sort of old sweat MPs like me, as it were, and there's a tremendous amount of very talented, fresh new blood coming in, and they're going to be picking up the Labour ministers, who are still there now, sadly, but they're going to have a harder time, and we're going to be kicking up the mayor as well, because some of the things we were picking up,
you
certainly
think it really
in the
will
suburbs,
play locally now, do you?
I think so, because people are really disenchanted, particularly in the London suburbs, about what Labour is doing as Labour councils, as Labour mayor, now Labour government. And so it's not going to be a bright parliament for these boys. They're going to be very unhappy Labour ministers, I promise you.
Justine Green, we've had one blonde northern female Prime Minister. Are you going to be the second?
I doubt it. My main aim at the moment is to be as good a possible constituency MP in Putney as I can.
OK, many thanks to you both.
Thank you very much.
Now, many of those Tory games, of course, came at the expense of Labour, but it wasn't just Conservatives who were taking seats. Across the capital and around the M25, Labour were down 14 on their 2001 performance, losing 11 to the Tories, 2 to the Lib Dems, and 1, of course, to Respect, as you've heard. Well, Carl Mercer's at Euston Station for us this morning. That iconic Enfield moment of '97 replayed in reverse, if you like, this morning. Carl, what are commuters saying there? Labour licking its wounds a bit?
Well, I think Labour would like us to believe that it's more about sticking plasters on a few grazes, but make no mistake, Emily, no one in the London Labour Party was expecting to lose 11 seats here in the capital. Put that in perspective, that's a fifth of the seats they used to hold here. And speaking to some Labour strategists before last night, they were saying, at worst, we reckon we're going to lose 6 to 8 seats, so not a great night. And particularly one seat they really didn't expect to lose, that seat that we mentioned earlier in the programme, that of the schools minister, or the former schools minister as he now is, Stephen Twigg, up in Enfield Southgate.
I think there will be many political lessons to be learnt from the pattern of results across the country. But what is clear is that we will have a third term of a Labour government, the first time ever that Labour has secured a third term in Parliament.
Yeah, Stephen Twigg trying to sound upbeat there, Emily, but he did talk, didn't he, about learning some lessons, and speaking to some of the commuters on their way to work this morning, they agreed with him and really picked out one key issue where they say Labour lost support in London.
I think it was good. All I wanted to see was Tony Blair come in, but with a reduced majority, so that he didn't have sort of carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to do.
I think the people of Britain have said what they felt about the war in Iraq, and it's always a mistake to ignore what people have to say in the country.
People were a bit disappointed with his, decision in going to war, but I'm happy, that he won. There's continuity in government, which is a good thing.
Carl, you mentioned the Stephen Twigg moment. What defeats have really hurt Labour the most?
Well, maybe I can put it like this, Emily. To lose one minister may seem unfortunate. To lose two might start to look a little careless. But, of course, that's what happened. Just on the M25 borders, of course, the junior health minister, Melanie Johnson, lost her seat up in Welling Hatfield. But I think Labour will also be smarting from those two defeats to the Lib Dems. They lost, of course, in Brent East, that seat that Sarah Tether took at a by-election in 2003. And then a former minister, the former Home Office minister, Barbara Roach, lost with a 15% swing to the Lib Dems up in Hornsey and Wood Green. Bad results for Labour.
How will Labour be turning this round to their advantage then, Carl?
Well, I think what they're trying to tell us this morning is that it could have been a lot worse, and they're playing up the fact that they did win some key seats that could have gone. They held on to Enfield North, of course, and Harrow East, key seats that the Tories could possibly on a better night have taken, and they'll also be keen to push the fact they won Watford, and it wasn't as bad as it could have been, they're saying.
OK, Carl, thanks. We can, of course, hear it from the horse's mouth. I wonder what the Labour minister, Tony McNulty, makes of all that. We can go back down to the South Bank now. He's with Tim Donovan.
Yeah, let's ask him straight away. The people Carl's been talking to at Euston saying certainly the Iraq issue, but also a sense perhaps the new Labour project, improvements in public services running out of steam.
I don't agree with that at all. I think we're only just getting up steam, whether it's transport, what we're doing in terms of rolling out safer policing teams across each borough, across each ward. it's not run out of steam at all. I think that's a ludicrous suggestion.
Derek Conway says there in the studio, next it'll be the mayor, you know, everyone, the Tories will turn their attention on him. You'll lose your way in the capital.
Let's remember that 21 seats, very, very good, pat on the back to the Tories. They are not halfway yet to what they had in 1992, where they had 48 MPs in London. If this is the great Tory surge, then they're about three elections away from getting anywhere in London.
Well, the reality, of course, is that the following election, things went very wrong for us, and that's precisely the position that Labour could be in, the double pincer attack from us on one hand, from the Liberal Democrats on the other. And I think where your people in Euston are absolutely right is that the mayor is part of the problem here, and I suspect that you're going to see more and more problems here in London.
Now, Mark Field talks of a pincer there, that you working with them, but in the key seats where you were trying to kind of beat the Conservatives, like Orpington or whatever, it was the Tories that won there. How are you going to place yourself as a meaningful opposition?
I think in the sunshine of the morning after, I tend to be a bit more consensual.
Yeah, we all feel quite nice.
No, I accept in a way what Tony says, which is that things have improved in public service. You can't turn these things around overnight. Tony was responsible for rail transport. That can't be changed in a day. So our first job is to try to build the consensus where we can on getting the service. The public actually don't want great rows between us. They want trains to arrive at that station on time. They want the buses to be cheap. They want the river to be clean. They want affordable housing that they can live in without being frightened. So there is a huge consensus. Now, there is an issue, of course, to do with the mayor, but that's a separate agenda, not for today.
On that note, to all three of you, thanks very much indeed for being here by the Thames. Emily, back to you.
Thanks, Tim. We're going to look a little more closely at the performance of the Lib Dems. They lost Guildford, but they gained Hornsey. Tony Travers is back. Hornsey, very urban seat. Does that surprise you, Tony?
I think Hornsey, no, is the straight answer. Hornsey looks rather like George Galloway's seat, Bethnal Green and Bow, one where the anti-Iraq war message got through and helped the Liberal Democrats. It probably did that elsewhere, but it won them that one.
What do you think the Lib Dem story is in London, then?
I think
protest, anti-war, or more than that?
It's a mixture of protest and actually winning, moving forward a bit, but they haven't quite made the breakthrough. London remains a Conservative Labour city with the Lib Dems in third place. There's no question about that. And in that sense, for the Conservatives who've done very badly in cities outside London again, they're still the Conservatives, the second party in London. That's very important for them.
Give us the overall picture then this morning. I was going to say tonight, we've lost all sense of time. A day ago we were asking if the political landscape of London has changed. Do you think it has?
I think it has, yes. I think the electorate has managed to send a clear message that they want more non-Labour MPs, they want to shake up their representation, and they've sent a message to the government.
So this phrase that Michael Howard was using all the way along, send a message.
I've just used that term, haven't I?
And
they have. I think they have sent a message, and I think if I were sitting in government this morning, I'd be thinking we need to do something about London and its surrounding suburbs, because these people are not happy, and I think that the government will have to learn that lesson.
OK, Tony Travers from the London School of Economics. Many thanks for your time on the show tonight. That's about it from us. I keep saying tonight. I'll be back, of course, with a special edition of our 6:30 programme if I ever work out what time of day it is. For now, enjoy the rest of the day. See you later. Bye-bye.